The story begins with an unnamed slave known only as Wednesday, describing her harsh reality. She was an ordinary slave, perpetually burdened with endless chores, hanging laundry, ironing clothes, cleaning, tidying rooms. Despite the exhaustion and gnawing hunger, she had no choice but to endure. More than the physical scars and hunger, her greatest fear was whether she would even live to adulthood. Yet, with nowhere to go, she accepted her fate. Lost in these grim thoughts, she was jolted back to reality by a sharp voice calling her name. A girl named Miriam was yelling at her, enraged by what she perceived as Wednesday's inattention. Miriam reminded her of her place, addressing her as Wednesday, a name given because she served the master every Wednesday. As Wednesday attempted to explain, Miriam slapped her across the face, demanding obedience. Wednesday knew that defending herself would only invite more punishment, so she remained silent. Unlike her, Miriam had a name, which granted her a degree of authority over the nameless slaves. This difference in status meant Wednesday had no power to resist or talk back, forcing her to endure the abuse in silence. Miriam reminded Wednesday of her duties assisting the master today, and when Wednesday tried to respond, she was rudely cut off, reminded that slaves had no right to speak back. She ordered Wednesday to clean the hallway and tidy the master's study before dinner, even mocking her eyes and demanding she keep them properly hidden. Wednesday messed up her own hair to cover her eyes. As Miriam left, she deliberately bumped into Wednesday, warning her that there would be no dinner if the work wasn't done. As she worked, Wednesday wondered why Miriam had become even more cruel, despite their shared lowly status. She noticed a boy named Sunday sweeping the floor, which surprised her, as it wasn't his turn. Sunday greeted her warmly, but quickly noticed the red mark on her cheek. Realizing what had happened, he gravely asked if Miriam was responsible, fearing Sunday would retaliate and end up locked up without food again. Wednesday decided to change the subject, asking him why he was sweeping when it wasn't his turn. Sunday, noticing it was Wednesday's turn to sweep, explained he was bored and decided to help. Wednesday, touched by his kindness, refused his help, knowing the master would be furious if he found out. She warned Sunday that the master was in a foul mood, but Sunday insisted he would be careful, reminding her that she had helped him before. Wednesday laughed, saying that since he was younger, it was only natural for her to look after him. She then recalled recurring dreams of another world, a world with airplanes in the sky, cars on the ground, and a school where she had friends. In those dreams, she had a younger brother with dark hair, and because Sunday also had dark hair, she instinctively saw him as a younger brother. Sunday playfully argued that he might actually be older than her. While Wednesday admitted that neither of them knew their true ages, she insisted he couldn't be older. Sunday, pouting, argued that he was still growing and would eventually be taller than her. Amused by his reaction, Wednesday teased him, laughing and saying he would certainly be taller when he was fully grown. Sunday insisted that when he grew taller, Wednesday shouldn't treat him like a little brother anymore. He then urged her to go hang the laundry, leaving the sweeping to him. Wednesday thanked him for his help, but reminded him to be careful not to get caught by the master. Sunday confidently, as she realized the master was inside. The study was usually empty at this time. Her heart pounded in her chest as she resolved to be as quiet as possible. Suddenly, the master slammed his fist on the table in frustration, cursing his inability to sell his slaves due to stricter border controls. Hoping to remain unnoticed, Wednesday nervously continued tidying. However, the master discovered her, immediately accusing her of eavesdropping. His fury ignited, and he lashed out, striking her hard across the face. Wednesday clenched her fists, suppressing any reaction. She knew that if she cried out or made a sound, he would only beat her more severely. The master scoffed at Wednesday's lack of tears after the blow, calling her a stubborn wretch. She trembled with fear, but remained silent. Frustrated by her silence, he demanded a response, accusing her of ingratitude and reminding her that without him, she would have starved to death in the streets. Wednesday silently endured the abuse, reminding herself that she was just a slave and had to persevere. She mumbled that she hadn't been ignoring him, but inwardly, she questioned how much longer she could bear this treatment, despite being taught to always obey her master. Summoning her courage, Wednesday finally spoke, saying that no matter what she did, he always seemed angry with her. The master was taken aback, sneering and demanding to know if she dared to talk back to him. Inwardly, a flicker of unease touched him as he looked in her eyes that he found repulsive. He coldly warned her that a slave's life was worth less than a dog's, implying that no one would care if she died. The master raised his whip, preparing to strike Wednesday. He advanced towards her, proclaiming that a disloyal slave had no right to live. He threatened to gouge out her eyes before delivering the final blow. Wednesday stumbled backward, convinced her end had come. Suddenly, the study door burst open. The master stopped, startled, and saw armed men standing in the doorway. Recognizing their insignia, he realized they were knights of the Imperial Guard. One of the knights spotted Wednesday, confirming they had found her in time. A platinum-haired man commanded the master, John Kyle, to drop his weapon. The master, astonished, questioned how they knew his name, but upon seeing the man's hair, he realized with dawning horror that this must be a member of the noble royal family. His hand trembled, and the whip slipped from his grasp. Wednesday gazed at the platinum-haired man, captivated by his handsome features. The man observed her, noting her golden hair. One of the knights confirmed her hair wasn't entirely platinum, but the man commented that Lady Erica's hair was of a similar shade. Realizing the man's royal status, the master fell to his knees, consumed by terror. Desperately, the master tried to plead with the nobleman, claiming Wednesday was just a servant, a runaway nobody. However, before he could finish, the nobleman kicked him in the face. The master screamed in pain, begging for mercy, questioning what he had done to deserve such treatment. The nobleman glared at him coldly, stating that he had simply offended him. Wednesday, a mixture of fear and confusion swirling within her, noticed something odd. Had the nobleman's eyes just flashed black? The master groaned, stammering a protest that even for the crown prince, the nobleman was going too far. He insisted that even royalty had no right to barge on a private property like this. The prince laughed derisively, dismissing the notion of private property, claiming a criminal like him had no right to speak of such things. He then tossed a stack of documents at the master, revealing evidence that John Kyle was a slave trader operating in the border regions. The prince declared that the empire showed no mercy to criminals. Seeing the documents, the master's terror intensified, realizing his fate was sealed. The prince sternly reminded the master that slave trading was considered treason within the empire, and he should have known the punishment for such a crime. Wednesday was stunned by this revelation. She had endured a lifetime of abuse and servitude, believing she had no choice but to obey. If slavery was forbidden, why had she suffered so much? She tensed as the prince approached her. He gently brushed her hair aside, looking into her eyes. Fear gripped her as she recalled all the cruel comments about her eyes. Miriam saying they were disgusting. Her master had threatened to gouge them out, and instinctively, she recoiled, hiding her face, begging him not to look. The crown prince, puzzled, asked her what she meant. Wednesday hesitated, then explained that everyone found her eyes disgusting. She expected him to react the same way, bracing herself for rejection. But instead, the prince gently patted her head, reassuring her that she needn't be afraid. He told her that at least she wasn't a monster like him. Wednesday, tearful, was confused by his words. Had he just called himself a monster? The prince then noticed her red eyes. Panic seized Wednesday. Surely, he would find them hideous compared to his own beautiful eyes. She quickly tried to hide them again, dreading what he would say next. The prince asked Wednesday if she was afraid of him. She shook her head frantically, but he noticed her tension, assuming it was fear. In reality, she was just desperate to conceal her eyes. He then ordered a knight to bring him something. The knight handed him a toy. The prince gently offered it to Wednesday, apologizing for possibly frightening her. Wednesday accepted the plush doll in surprise, marveling at its softness, but quickly panicked again, realizing she had taken it without thinking. She tried to return it, worried there must be some expectation attached. Just then, as their eyes met, something incredible happened. The color of their eyes shifted. The prince smiled, acknowledging the change, while the knights stared in shock. John Kyle, the master, watched in disbelief, unable to comprehend what had just occurred. The prince finally spoke the word that would change everything. "I've finally found you," savior of Ascania. His thoughts racing, he revealed the truth. Wednesday was the one destined to save them from the curse. She was the Empire's only princess, his little sister. Overjoyed, the prince told Wednesday he had finally found her, that he had been searching for her for so long. Then he abruptly stopped, leaving Wednesday uneasy. She wondered if she had done something wrong. He leaned down, noticing the flush in her cheeks, and asked if she was cold. Startled, Wednesday quickly denied being cold. Unconvinced, the prince pressed her, asking why her cheeks were red. She nervously touched her face, but as she glanced at her master, she hesitated to answer. John Kyle cowered in fear. The prince instantly understood. The prince turned towards the terrified master, demanding an explanation. John Kyle desperately pleaded for mercy, insisting it wasn't what the prince thought. Ignoring his pleas, the prince asked if Wednesday's eyes had originally been green, but had changed to red at some point. John Kyle, stunned, hesitated, then admitted that when he first saw her, her eyes were green, but they had turned red after she'd been ill. He had always assumed it was a side effect of her sickness. In his thoughts, he recalled how red eyes were considered bad luck, how they irritated him every time he saw them. But now, disbelief washed over him. If the prince was right, Wednesday had imperial blood. John Kyle questioned the prince, reminding him that the royal family had never successfully produced a girl. The prince acknowledged this, explaining that due to the misdeeds of the first emperor, a curse had fallen upon the Ascanian family, preventing the birth of girls. However, it was said that if a girl were indeed born, the curse would finally be lifted. Wednesday was confused, struggling to understand what the prince meant by the first emperor's misdeeds and the curse. The prince then revealed that 10 years ago, one of the emperor's concubines had given birth to a girl. John Kyle, shocked, refused to believe it, arguing that Wednesday was just a slave he had found after she escaped from the slave market. The prince drew his sword, declaring Wednesday's ability to change her eye color based on her emotions was undeniable proof of her Ascanian royal blood. The terrified master begged for his life, and Wednesday, seeing his desperation, trembled with fear as well. Just then, a knight gently draped a cloak over Wednesday's face, suggesting to the crown prince that the imperial princess was too young to witness such a scene. The prince paused, conceding that she shouldn't have to see this. He then ordered another knight, Godden, to take John Kyle away. Godden nodded and dragged the terrified slave trader from the room. John Kyle desperately fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness, claiming he had only raised Wednesday. The prince's fury ignited. He pointed his sword at John Kyle, declaring that the man had sealed his own fate. John Kyle screamed in terror, but the prince abruptly stopped. The knights exchanged puzzled glances, wondering what was amiss. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the prince ordered them to spare John Kyle's life. The knights questioned the prince's sudden change of heart, wondering if mercy had taken hold. However, the prince's voice was cold as he stated that John Kyle didn't deserve a swift death. He would suffer, the prince vowed, until he begged for the release of death itself. A chill ran through the knights at his words. They noted the fierce coldness burning in the prince's icy blue eyes. Then, the prince turned towards Wednesday. She was still hidden beneath the cloak. Hearing his approach, she flinched, her small body tense. The prince lifted the cloak from her face. He observed how small and fragile she was, the realization hitting him that this truly was his little sister. Her green eyes betrayed her anxiety. The descendants of Ascania possessed eyes that shifted color with their emotions. Normally blue, black with anger, gold with happiness, red with sorrow, violet with excitement, and green with anxiety. Seeking to comfort her, the prince assured her that everything was all right. When he reached out to pat her head, she recoiled slightly, then seemed surprised by the gentle touch. The prince then softly told her he had waited a long time to see her, and that many others were waiting as well. It was time, he finally said, to come home. Wednesday was confused by the prince's words about going home, as she believed this was her home. She didn't understand why they kept calling her the imperial princess. The prince asked if she had any qualms about leaving, but Wednesday, unfamiliar with the word, felt embarrassed that she didn't know its meaning. A knight remarked to the prince that the word might be too difficult for a child her age. The prince seemed surprised, while Wednesday felt ashamed, not wanting them to think she was stupid. Knight Colin, who had 6 younger siblings, offered to speak with her. He introduced himself with a warm smile. This made him seem kind to Wednesday. She nervously returned the greeting. Colin excitedly pointed this out to the prince, who looked startled. Colin realized Prince Chester needed to learn how to smile at children. Colin reassured Wednesday that she had nothing to fear, that they would protect her. However, Wednesday, still nervous, insisted she wasn't the imperial princess, believing they had made a mistake. Prince Chester firmly declared that only one imperial princess could break the curse on the Ascania bloodline, and that person was undoubtedly her. Wednesday was too stunned to believe it, having lived her entire life as a slave. She protested that she was just Wednesday, not some imperial princess. The knights murmured amongst themselves, trying to understand her meaning, joking that perhaps she liked Wednesdays. Suddenly, a loud shriek interrupted them. It was Sunday, calling out for Wednesday. She turned to see a knight holding Sunday in the air with one hand. Panic seized her as she screamed his name in terror. Sunday struggled against the knight's grip, angrily demanding they leave Wednesday alone. A knight apologized to Prince Chester for the delay, explaining that Sunday was quick on his feet and difficult to catch. Despite being held, Sunday managed to kick the knight and break free, rushing towards Wednesday with concern. Sunday gripped Wednesday's face, frantically asking if she was all right, if they had hurt her. Touched by his concern, Wednesday smiled and assured him she was fine. Just then, Sunday noticed something unusual about Wednesday's eyes and started to comment. But before he could finish, Colin pulled him away. Wednesday, bewildered, wondered what he'd been about to say regarding her eyes. Sunday struggled against the knight, demanding to be released. Colin scoffed, remarking on the little boy's audacity to kick an imperial knight. The other knight joked that Colin should be careful or Sunday might kick him next. One of the knights, unaware of Wednesday's identity, asked where the imperial princess they had been searching for was. However, as he looked at Wednesday, he hesitated, the realization dawning that this small girl with the shaggy, sheepdog-like hair might be the princess. Before he could say more, Chester angrily barked his name, Sir Heath Radvold, causing the knight to flinch. Sunday stepped in front of Wednesday, determined to protect her. He warned Chester that if he intended to harm her, he would have to go through him first, regardless of his noble status. Chester, perplexed, asked Sunday why he kept calling her Wednesday. Sunday explained that she was a weekday slave who worked on Wednesdays. Chester, shocked, asked what that meant. Wednesday hesitantly explained that young children were trained to perform specific tasks on designated days of the week to condition them into obedience to their masters. Those subjected to this training were called weekday slaves. Realizing the cruelty she had endured, Chester became furious, his eyes darkening with rage. Wednesday, noticing the shift in color, realized that black must be the color his eyes took on when he was angry. Colin expressed sympathy for Wednesday's plight, but she insisted she wasn't the imperial princess, believing her mother's slave status meant she had no noble blood. However, Chester firmly corrected her, revealing that the woman who birthed her was no slave, but one of the most respected noble women in the capital. Wednesday stared in disbelief at the news that her mother was a noble woman. She struggled to process the thought. Sunday, equally stunned, asked if that meant Wednesday was a noble. One of the knights clarified that she wasn't just any noble. She was the crown prince's sister, the imperial princess of Balrog. Sunday was dumbfounded, unable to believe it. He argued that they had grown up together as slaves and questioned whether they had the wrong person. As proof, Chester asked Sunday what color Wednesday's eyes had been moments before. Just as she was processing all of this, her eyes shifted from green to red. Sunday hesitated before answering green. Chester confirmed that only those with imperial blood possessed eyes that changed color with their emotions, a fact that could not be denied. He explained that there had been many impostors claiming to be the missing imperial princess, hoping to prove they possessed Ascanian blood and the ability to break the curse. However, not one of them had been able to prove their legitimacy. Wednesday deduced that this must have been because their eyes didn't change color. Chester confirmed this, stating that she was the first and only one whose eyes proved the authenticity of her lineage. Wednesday struggled to absorb the truth about her identity. She thought back on her past, how she had barely survived each day without starvation or beatings, and found it difficult to believe she belonged to such a noble lineage. If she truly was the imperial princess, then what had her life been so far? Sunday, still overwhelmed with emotion, demanded to know why it had taken them so long to find Wednesday. He angrily asked why they hadn't come sooner, considering all the suffering she had endured. Collins silently agreed with Sunday's frustration, even if his outburst was inappropriate. However, Chester coldly questioned Sunday asking him what right he had to demand answers. Even Wednesday admitted her curiosity about why they hadn't come for her sooner. Chester promised to explain everything once they returned to the castle, adding that their father was waiting to see her. The mention of a father filled Wednesday with a mixture of shock and apprehension. The concept of having a family, of someone waiting for her, felt alien, like a dream. Clutching the doll in her hand, she felt lost and uncertain about what lay ahead. Sunday, stunned by Chester's intention to take Wednesday away, immediately insisted on going with her. He declared his willingness to do whatever it took, refusing to leave her side. Wednesday, worried, tried to stop him, but Sunday's resolve was unshakable. He didn't care where she went. He just wanted to be with her. Colin and Heath attempted to reason with Sunday, explaining that all the slaves had been freed, so he needn't follow Wednesday. But Sunday refused to budge, declaring he would protect her regardless. Unmoved, Chester scoffed at Sunday's claim of protecting Wednesday. To test him, Chester drew his sword, pointing it at Sunday's throat. The boy trembled, fear gripping him. The sight of this sent Wednesday into a panic. She rushed towards them, pleading with Chester to stop. She wouldn't allow anything to happen to Sunday. But before she could reach them, Colin grabbed her arm, restraining her. Wednesday struggled fiercely, desperate to break free. Sunday was the only one who had always been there for her, sharing her pain and hardship. He was her only friend, and the thought of losing him was unbearable. Sunday offered her a small, reassuring smile, telling her not to worry about him. Witnessing Sunday's unwavering resolve and care for Wednesday, Chester lowered his sword. Chester warned Sunday to be careful with his promises, as those who broke them often died the quickest. But Sunday stood firm, declaring he always kept his word, and that Wednesday had saved his life. His words surprised Wednesday. Seeing the sincerity in Sunday's eyes, and considering his potential usefulness, Chester finally sheathed his sword. Wednesday wrenched herself free from Colin's grip. She rushed to Sunday, anxiously checking him for injuries. He reassured her that he was fine. Furious at Chester's actions, Wednesday glared at him. Chester then announced their return to the palace and assigned Heath the task of looking after Sunday. Heath, taken aback, protested, wondering why he had to do it. Meanwhile, Wednesday reflected on how cold and intimidating the crown prince was. At first, she had only thought him handsome, but now she realized that if she truly was the imperial princess, this cold, formidable man was in fact her brother. As evening fell and they stopped to rest, Godden approached Chester. He informed him that he had been looking for him. Chester inquired about the child, but when Godden assumed he meant Sunday, Chester gave him a sharp look. He clarified that he was asking about his sister. Realizing his mistake, Godden quickly corrected himself, reporting that Wednesday was asleep in the carriage. Chester inquired if she needed anything. Godden replied that despite the bumpy journey, she hadn't complained once. In fact, she had even insisted on getting out of the carriage, saying it wasn't fair for her to ride in such comfort alone. Godden had struggled to persuade her to get back in. Chester was surprised she considered the carriage too comfortable. He glanced at it, noting it was a plain, unremarkable vehicle, intended to avoid attracting attention. He had expected her to be displeased with it, yet she found it too luxurious. It made him realize what a well-behaved child she was. Godden agreed, finding it unusual. Most children would have complained or thrown a tantrum. She was so quiet, it was easy to forget she was there. Reflecting on this, Chester recalled encountering over 100 impostors claiming to be the imperial princess, none of whom were genuine. The curse, which could only be broken when a girl was born to the Ascania bloodline, seemed destined to last forever. However, when the emperor ordered an investigation, Chester felt a flicker of hope. 6 months ago, while he was still on the battlefield, the emperor had secretly written to Chester, commanding him to find his daughter. Following countless leads, Chester searched for a sister who might not even exist, and when he finally found her, she was but a small girl without even a name. Chester inquired about any word from the emperor. Godden replied that he had dispatched a messenger before their departure, so a response should await them at the castle. Chester nodded. Godden also informed him that Chester's younger brother, Prince Jed, was on his way. Chester acknowledged this. reflecting that Wednesday was Jed's sister as well. Godden expressed his relief at their success in finding the princess, remarking on her apparent intelligence. Chester agreed, noting her resemblance to Lady Erica. Godden reminisced about Erica's beauty, confident that Wednesday would also grow into a beautiful princess. However, Chester hoped she wouldn't be too much like her mother, a sentiment that gave Godden pause. Chester's mind drifted to the past. Wednesday's mother, Erica Grahams, had been the Emperor's most beloved concubine, renowned for her beauty and wit. Yet, her fate had been a tragic one. Being chosen as the Emperor's favorite meant endless peril, especially for those who bore daughters. For the birth of a girl bestowed the right to become the first empress the empire had ever known, and noble families sought to eradicate any competition. This had led to Lady Erica becoming a casualty of a brutal power struggle. The Ascania family curse further complicated matters, resulting in Wednesday falling into the hands of slave traders. But how could Chester possibly explain all of this to a little girl? Godden noticed Chester's unusual concern for another, realizing he had never seen him so worried. Chester, typically reserved and strict with himself, seemed to hold a particular tenderness for his little sister. To lighten the mood, Godden changed the subject, mentioning the Emperor's eagerness to see the princess. He shared that Sir Myers had gone to great lengths to prevent the Emperor from leaving the battlefield to find her. Chester agreed, saying that if the Emperor weren't occupied, he would have come himself, and had he done so, he would have burned everything in this region to ashes. As Chester stood and walked away, a puzzled Godden called after him. Lost in thought, Chester mused that if the Emperor had come, he wouldn't have merely destroyed the slave traders' homes. He would have tortured them, leaving nothing behind. He knew that if his actions were judged by the Emperor, he would be deemed too soft to accomplish anything of significance. But Chester's quest for vengeance for Wednesday was far from over. Resolute, Chester ordered Godden to execute everyone involved in the slave trade. Chester vowed that he would never allow another child to be kidnapped and sold as merchandise on his land. Godden bowed in acknowledgement. Later, Chester entered the carriage where Wednesday slept. He noticed her clutching a worn stuffed toy, reflecting that she cared for it more than him. She could have thousands, millions even, if she asked, he thought. Chester gently lifted his sleeping sister, adjusting her to a more comfortable position while ensuring she retained her hold on the toy. He watched over her, smiling as he contemplated all the things he wanted to give her: beautiful dolls, elegant dresses, comfortable shoes, and expensive jewels. Yet, he realized what she needed most wasn't something he could provide. But he consoled himself, for once they reached the capital, a special gift would be waiting for her. The next morning, Wednesday awoke, enveloped in a comforting warmth. Clutching her plush doll, Wednesday thought how soft and comfortable everything felt, almost like a dream. She remembered boarding a carriage the previous day, but still found it hard to believe. Suddenly, she overheard the knights outside talking, mentioning that the royal curse might have been broken now that the princess had been found. This startled her, leaving her wondering what curse they were referring to. Still half asleep, she recalled the men who came for her claiming she was an imperial princess, and that they were now heading to the capital. Yet, something felt amiss. She distinctly remembered falling asleep on the floor, but now she lay comfortably, her plush doll in hand. Confused, she wondered if someone had come in while she slept. Just then, Colin knocked on the carriage door, asking if she was awake. As she sat up, a red cloak fell to the floor, Chester's cloak, the one he had placed over her the previous night. Seeing it, she gasped, wondering why the crown prince's cloak was with her. When Colin noticed her silence and asked if anything was wrong, she nervously assured him that everything was fine, despite her lingering unease. Wednesday anxiously wondered if Chester knew his cloak was with her, carefully avoiding stepping on it. As she opened the door, Colin greeted her, and she hesitantly responded, still unaccustomed to being addressed so formally. As Colin began to mention breakfast, he suddenly noticed the cloak, startled. Wednesday nervously explained that she woke up with the cloak on her, unsure if she had done something wrong. Colin was surprised, thinking it unusual for Chester to cover anyone with his own cloak, especially a young girl. He then told Wednesday that Chester must have been worried she would be cold, so he covered her with his cloak. Hearing this, Wednesday's eyes widened in surprise, and she looked down guiltily, apologetic for letting the cloak fall to the floor. Panic swelled within her, fearing Chester's potential wrath. Colin smiled reassuringly, telling her she had nothing to worry about, that even if she had stepped on the cloak, Chester wouldn't be angry. In fact, Even if she had thrown in the mud, he wouldn't say a word. Wednesday gasped, shocked, insisting she would never do such a thing. Amused by her earnestness, Colin mentioned his youngest brother, who used to roll around in the mud with his cloak on numerous occasions. A curious, Wednesday asked why. Colin told Wednesday that, according to his brother, children often did unpredictable things, and try to understand their actions was pointless. Wednesday hesitantly asked if no one would be angry with her, even if she misbehaved. Colin clarified that while minor things wouldn't get her in trouble, she would still be reprimanded if necessary. Wednesday thought to herself that she should have expected as much, but Colin encouraged her not to be so reserved, even jokingly suggesting she should cause more trouble, proposing she could kick the cloak around for fun. Wednesday was perplexed, unsure what he meant. Colin then invited her to breakfast, and she nodded in agreement. Though she didn't fully understand what he was saying, she felt a sense of warmth and comfort. As they prepared to leave, Colin told her she could bring her little friend along. Confused, Wednesday wondered what he was referring to, before realizing she had been holding her plush doll the entire time. Deciding it was best to leave it in the carriage, she turned to put it down. Before she could, Colin scooped her up, saying he would escort her, and gently helped her out of the carriage. Colin presented Wednesday with breakfast, asking if she needed anything else. She nervously declined, but with encouragement began to eat. Seeing the meal, soft white bread and a warm soup filled with meat and potatoes, Wednesday was in disbelief. She had never imagined eating such food and doubted she was truly allowed to enjoy it. Despite her hunger, she struggled to finish her first proper meal. The cook berated himself for not doing a good job, but in truth, Wednesday was simply overwhelmed by the warmth and deliciousness of the food. Colin gently picked up her plush doll, placing it on the adjacent chair, and teased that her friend looked ready to eat as well. He reassured Wednesday that if she wanted more, all she had to do was ask. As Wednesday began to eat, Colin observed that she was too small for her age, hoping she would eat more than she had the day before. Watching Wednesday eagerly devour her breakfast, Colin was pleased to see her appetite had improved and was glad he had put extra effort into the meal. Finished, Wednesday told Colin she was full. While he wished she would eat a little more, he was satisfied seeing her empty plate. Colin joked that his youngest brother could eat 10 bowls of the same meal, expressing a hope that Wednesday might have a similar appetite. Curious, Wednesday asked, did his youngest brother really eat that much? It was the first question Wednesday had directed at him, leaving Colin both surprised and delighted. Colin explained that his fourth brother ate like a wolf, consuming more than half of his monthly allowance. Wednesday recalled Colin mentioning he had 4 brothers and 2 sisters. Colin then shared that his siblings were always causing trouble, making him wonder if all boys their age were so mischievous. As Wednesday thought about little boys, she wondered how Sunday was doing and began to feel a pang of sadness. Noticing her concern, Colin asked if something was troubling her. Wednesday asked if it was true that Sunday would be joining them later. Colin reassured her that, as per the Crown Prince's orders, Sunday would be brought to the capital, but due to other errands, it would take him longer. He estimated Sunday would catch up with them within a month, perhaps even sooner. Relieved by Colin's words, Wednesday sighed, hugging her plush doll, happy at the prospect of seeing Sunday again. Colin then informed her they would reach the capital before the end of the day. Thinking of the capital, Wednesday recalled Colin mentioning delicious food, comfortable beds, and 2 older brothers waiting for her. However, she wondered if her other brothers were like Crown Prince Chester. Recalling Chester's coldness towards Sunday, she clutched her doll tightly, hoping her other brothers were more like Colin than the prince. She conceded that Chester had shown her kindness by covering her with his cloak to keep her warm, meaning he might not be entirely bad. Despite this, she still hoped her other brothers would be different. Unsure of what they were like, she nonetheless looked forward to meeting them. As the carriage journeyed towards the capital, Wednesday gazed out the window, excitedly admiring a beautiful lake. Colin cautioned her to be careful leaning out, and she thanked him. Then she noticed a large structure in the distance, realizing they were approaching the capital. Excitement bubbled within her, everything feeling new and intriguing. Remembering her plush doll, she held it up, allowing it to see the view as well. Suddenly, the carriage lurched to a halt. Curious, Wednesday peeked outside, wondering if they had arrived. However, she noticed a tension in the air. The knights stood anxiously, sweat beading on their brows, while Chester glared at them. Seeing their serious expressions, Wednesday grew apprehensive, wondering if something bad had happened. Chester angrily berated the knights for planning to bring the princess into the capital in an ordinary carriage. Godden bowed and attempted to explain that while the princess deserved a proper arrival, procuring an ornate carriage wasn't simple. However, Chester demanded the largest, most extravagant royal carriage. Colin informed Chester that the procedure for hiring a carriage bearing the royal insignia was complex, and without a royal family member present, such a carriage couldn't leave the palace grounds. Chester remained unmoved, sternly reminding them of his authority and ordering them to procure the carriage immediately. Godden and Colin fell silent, unable to argue. Meanwhile, Colin noticed Wednesday peeking through the window. He wondered how, despite her difficult upbringing, she had managed to retain such a pure heart. He believed her return to the capital warranted a grand celebration, that she deserved a magnificent parade. Colin agreed with Chester's sentiment and suggested they take the preparations a step further, adding flowers and a marching band to make the entrance feel like a true spectacle. The knights were taken aback by Colin's sudden enthusiasm. Chester, however, loved the idea and ordered Godden to inform the Lord Chamberlain to prepare everything. Godden obeyed, but offered a silent prayer of sympathy for the Lord Chamberlain, knowing the sheer amount of trouble this would cause. Later, a new carriage was brought forth for Wednesday. She marveled at its grandeur, finally understanding why Chester had called her previous carriage shabby. She admired the gleaming wheels and elegant design, awestruck that she would be riding in something so luxurious. Noticing her reaction, Chester asked if she disliked it, then surmised that, being so young, she might prefer a carriage decorated with flowers. Wednesday, her curiosity piqued, innocently inquired if such flower-adorned carriages existed, causing Godden to inwardly cringe, fearing Chester might take her words to heart. Sure enough, Chester ordered Godden to procure a carriage decorated with flowers, much to the knight's dismay. Realizing she had caused trouble, Wednesday quickly interjected, stopping Chester, and assuring him that she loved the current carriage, and even the previous one had been fine. She insisted she didn't want to trouble anyone by requesting a new one. Chester reassured her that no one could force her to do anything and gently encouraged her to ask for whatever she desired. Wednesday noticed his red eyes, thinking he looked sad. His kindness and consideration touched her deeply, leaving her feeling both happy and a little shy. Smiling, she thanked Chester and insisted that the carriage was truly beautiful. At that moment, her eyes turned gold, a sign of happiness in members of the royal family. Seeing this, Chester smiled with satisfaction. He gently patted Wednesday's head, calling her little sister, a gesture that deeply moved her. She savored the words brother and sister, realizing that Chester didn't seem so frightening anymore. It felt like she had discovered a new side to him. As she stepped into the new carriage, she marveled at its beauty and wondered if Chester would be riding with her. She asked Colin, who explained that Chester had gone ahead to lead the procession, hinting that the following day would cause quite a stir. Curious, Wednesday wondered why. Upon entering the capital, she was greeted by a grand celebration. The streets were thronged with people rejoicing at her arrival, flower petals raining down from the sky. Overwhelmed by the spectacle, she marveled at the softness of the petals and took in the breathtaking scene, the azure sky, the swirling petals, and the awestruck gazes of the crowd. Happiness swelling within her, she silently vowed to remember this day forever. Chester Ascania, Crown Prince of Balrock, led the grand procession, escorting his sister, Wednesday, to the imperial palace. Her debut in the capital would later be remembered as one of the most significant events in the kingdom's history. As they traveled through the city, Wednesday became fascinated by a dragon-shaped fountain and noticed an empty space amidst the surrounding buildings, as if deliberately left open. Colin pointed out the ancient dragon carved on the palace gates, explaining that the first emperor had made a pact with an ancient dragon, securing protection for the empire. He told her that the dragon symbolized the royal family. Intrigued and excited, Wednesday was curious about this ancient dragon and realized that the world beyond the mansion where she had grown up was full of mysteries. She yearned to learn more. Wednesday recalled a fellow slave telling her that reading books made people wise. While cleaning the study, she would sneak peeks at the books on the shelves, admiring the pictures within, but always wondering what the words said. She hoped she could ask someone to teach her how to read and write. When they arrived, Chester opened the carriage door, scooped Wednesday into his arms and carried her towards the magnificent mansion. The sheer scale of the place overwhelmed Wednesday. Just navigating the grounds, she thought, would require stronger legs. Outside, the steward and servants waited to receive them. The steward bowed deeply to Chester. Then his gaze fell upon Wednesday. Seeing her tangled hair obscuring half her face, her small, thin frame, he understood. A pang of sympathy struck him. She must have endured hardship before arriving here. The steward introduced himself as Philip, the head steward of the imperial palace. Then, Chester inquired if a letter from the emperor had arrived. Philip presented the letter. Chester explained to Wednesday that it was from His Majesty, who, unfortunately, was unable to greet her personally. A wave of anxiety washed over Wednesday as she accepted the letter. She clutched it tightly in her hand, her heart sinking. She couldn't read. What was she supposed to do? Chester, ever observant, noticed Wednesday's distress and quickly grasped the reason. He told her the emperor's handwriting was notoriously difficult to decipher and offered to read it to her. The letter began, "To my dearest daughter, whom I have yet to meet." The emperor apologized for his absence and assured her that he had been thinking of her constantly. He promised to visit her as soon as he had attended to some urgent matters. He also mentioned a special gift he had prepared for her. Wednesday's curiosity piqued. A sapling. Chester then explained that in the old tongue, sapling meant Chloe, and told her that her new name was Chloe Ascania. Tears welled in Wednesday's eyes as the name washed over her. She remembered envying Miriam, how even the flowers and horses had names, while she had never had one of her own. But now, things were different. More than anything, someone had finally called her by her new name. Chester, with a gentle smile, reassured Chloe, confirming once more that she was now Chloe Ascania, and introduced himself as her brother. Overwhelmed with joy, Chloe responded, "I am Chloe, Your Highness." However, Chester paused, a flicker of sadness and frustration crossing his face. He realized she still saw him as distant and formal, hurt that she hadn't used his name. His silence made Chloe nervous, worried she had done something wrong. Noticing Chloe's eyes turning green, a sign of her anxiety, Chester quickly reassured her. He told her that a sapling held infinite potential. It could grow into a towering tree or a beautiful flower. He emphasized that she wasn't just the emperor's hope, but the hope of their entire family. Chloe, initially just happy to have a name, was deeply touched by such heartfelt praise, something she had never expected. Excitement bubbling within her, Chloe asked Chester when the emperor would return so she could express her gratitude. Chester, however, chose not to reveal that the emperor was currently on the battlefield, commanding his troops. Philip, noticing Chloe's fatigue from the journey, suggested she rest. Chester agreed and inquired about her accommodations. Philip informed him that a room had been prepared for her within Chester's palace, although it wasn't perfectly arranged due to the short notice. Chloe looked around, her eyes scanning the surroundings. She realized that everyone in the palace seemed to be male and wondered if there were no women present. Chester, noticing her contemplative silence, asked if something was wrong. She didn't respond immediately, still adjusting to being called by her new name. When he addressed her again, she finally remembered and answered. Curious, Chloe asked if all the men surrounding her were palace servants. Philip assured her that she needn't be so formal. Chester explained to Chloe that aside from the emperor himself and her other brothers, she held the highest rank within the palace. He even muttered that she might be more important than the emperor himself, leaving Chloe bewildered. Returning to her earlier question, Chester confirmed that the men surrounding them were indeed palace servants and asked if something was amiss. Chloe replied that she simply hadn't seen any women. She recalled how in her previous residence, all the domestic tasks, such as cooking, laundry, and other chores, were performed by female slaves. She wondered if the imperial palace was different from other places for this reason. Chester revealed to Chloe that, due to a curse, women were not permitted within the palace walls. A perplexed Chloe asked why. Chester simply replied that it was because of the curse, which only piqued her curiosity further. She remembered hearing about this curse before. The knights had spoken of it near the carriage, saying that now that the princess had been found, the royal family's curse would be lifted. She also recalled Chester mentioning something about it on the day he came to find her, alluding to the misdeeds of the first emperor. Driven by her desire to know, she asked what kind of curse it was. Chester hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Seeing his reaction, Chloe grew nervous and quickly said that if it was something she shouldn't know, he didn't have to tell her. However, Chester insisted that she had a right to know. In fact, it concerned her more than anyone else. But instead of explaining everything at once, he decided to reveal it gradually. With that, Chester began leading Chloe towards a room. As they approached, an intensely bright light spilled from within, causing Chloe to stop, bewildered. Curiosity tugged at her, wondering what awaited her inside. Chloe gasped at the luxurious chamber, her eyes wide with excitement as she took it all in. Meanwhile, Chester questioned Philip about the room's decor, finding it unsuitable for a child. Philip apologized, admitting he hadn't anticipated the princess being so much smaller than others her age. He explained that, for convenience, he had chosen a room close to Chester's. Chester was frustrated, thinking how could the palace staff be so clueless about preparing a room for a girl, when no female had ever resided within the palace walls. However, Chloe, delighted, asked if this would be her new home. Chester clarified that it was only temporary and promised to arrange a proper room for her soon. Chloe, finding the room more than adequate, silently pondered his generosity. Then Chester had Chloe look at him and assured her that she no longer needed to hide her eyes from anyone. In fact, people would admire them. He then mentioned he had some tasks for her. Hearing this, Chloe immediately thought there was no such thing as a free lunch. A name and lodging, she mused, must come with expectations, so she braced herself for whatever duties were assigned to her. However, Chester's first task stunned her. He simply wanted her to eat more. Chester gently told Chloe that her only tasks were to eat well, play freely, and sleep as much as she wanted. She was dumbfounded, unable to believe such simple things were considered her duties. Chester affectionately patted her head, emphasizing that his only wish was for her to grow up healthy. Later that night, Chloe slept peacefully in her room, but woke suddenly with a jolt of panic. She instinctively thought she needed to hurry and start working. However, the palace was silent. Clutching her doll for comfort, she reflected on how, despite no longer being a slave, she still experienced these pangs of panic. The soft bed and warm room felt foreign, a stark contrast to the storage room she once inhabited, where she slept on a floor covered in straw. Life as a slave had been solely focused on survival, with no room for close relationships or emotional support. Then she thought of Sunday, the only person she had ever been close to. They had spent their childhood together, and she wondered how he was doing. She hoped he would arrive soon, because there was something important she wanted to tell him. Looking at the sapling, her father's gift, she remembered its significance. A profound joy filled her at having a real name. She eagerly anticipated the moment Sunday would call her Chloe, realizing that names held a special meaning. Then it occurred to her that Sunday should have a proper name too. Chloe excitedly spoke to her stuffed doll, thinking about asking Chester to help her choose a name for Sunday. She eagerly imagined what name would suit him, looking forward to calling him by it. She comforted her plush doll, whispering that she wouldn't forget it either. Lost in thought, she suddenly realized dawn had broken. Just then, Philip knocked on her door, announcing that breakfast was ready and reminding her that she had a busy day ahead. Chloe quickly called back, letting him know she was awake. At the dining table, she marveled at the sheer variety of food, noticing how new dishes seemed to appear every day. Unbeknownst to her, Philip and Chester had been putting pressure on the palace chef to constantly create unique and extravagant meals for her, ensuring a luxurious feast at every meal. Philip presented a lavish breakfast menu, including a chilled beetroot soup with yogurt and pickled vegetables, and a salmon steak cooked with turnips and spices. Chloe was astonished that the meal had become so fancy. She wondered if someone important would be joining her, perhaps Chester or one of her brothers whom she had yet to meet. Then, Philip informed Chloe of her schedule for the day. After breakfast, she would have time to play, perhaps a stroll in the gardens or time with toys. He offered to have the servants fetch any plaything she desired. Chloe hesitated, realizing she had never truly had toys. Her childhood playthings had been stones, broken branches, and discarded screws. She'd barely had time for play, only vaguely remembering a time spent playing with Sunday. Seeing her reaction, a pang of sympathy touched Philip. Philip reassured Chloe that she could ask him anything, anytime, and shouldn't feel embarrassed about not knowing something. He emphasized that asking questions was a vital part of learning. Chloe, initially hesitant, felt relieved, knowing she wouldn't be scolded for her inquiries here. She thanked Philip and promised to let him know if any questions arose. As they spoke, a servant entered, informing Philip that Chester was looking for him. Philip excused himself immediately and went to meet Chester. Upon his arrival, Chester inquired about Chloe's well-being. Philip reported that she was having breakfast and mentioned that the palace chef had outdone himself today. He was confident Chloe would enjoy her meal, hinting at the special efforts they were taking to ensure her comfort and happiness. Chester then inquired about the tasks he had entrusted to Philip. Philip informed him that a hairdresser was scheduled to visit later that day, followed by a tailor to take Chloe's measurements, and a shoemaker the following day for her footwear. Chester approved of these arrangements and asked if there was anything else that needed to be done. Philip suggested procuring jewelry and toys for Chloe and planned to engage someone with impeccable taste and knowledge for this purpose. Chester concurred, telling Philip to make the necessary arrangements if he found anything lacking. Finally, Chester asked if a suitable lady-in-waiting had been found. Philip replied that a notice would be posted today, and he was confident that many qualified candidates would apply. Chester commented, with a knowing tone, that they would likely come flocking. Chester recalled the long-standing rule forbidding women within the palace walls, originally implemented to combat a mysterious curse. This restriction had led to ambitious women gathering outside the palace, hoping to be chosen as imperial consorts. Some even resorted to disguising themselves as maids to infiltrate the palace, believing that if they bore a royal child, they would secure a place within the royal family. Chester scorned their futile ambitions and had always ensured such schemes never succeeded. However, with Chloe now residing within the palace, he realized the rule could no longer be upheld. For her well-being and proper upbringing, women must be allowed entry. Furthermore, Chester acknowledged that keeping Chloe's presence a secret was no longer feasible. Since the grand parade, curious crowds had begun to gather outside the palace walls, eager for a glimpse of the newly revealed princess. Meanwhile, whispers and rumors about Chloe's identity and status rippled through noble families, spreading like wildfire. Chester contemplated the growing implications of her presence on the Empire's future. Gadin, noticing the increasing attention surrounding her, inquired whether Chester intended to deploy guard dogs around the palace for enhanced security. Chester's thoughts turned not to guard dogs, but to Colin Nigel, a highly skilled knight and paladin among the most elite warriors. During their journey back to the palace, Colin had formed a close bond with Chloe and earned her trust. His gentle nature, especially considering his 6 younger siblings and fondness for children, made him the ideal candidate for her personal guard. Without hesitation, Chester assigned Colin as Chloe's protector. Deeply honored, Colin accepted the responsibility with a bow and departed. Gadin, however, considering the gravity of the position, questioned whether it was the right decision. Chester reassured him that someone would be assigned to keep an eye on them. Once Jed arrived, Gadin was taken aback, implying that Jed's involvement could lead to unforeseen developments. He was surprised by the mention of Prince Jed, the second prince. He recalled a time when it was unimaginable for the imperial princes to show concern for one another. Yet, as foretold in the legends, Chloe's arrival was already reshaping the dynamics within the Ascanian royal family. Meanwhile, Chester handed a document to Philip, inquiring how long the task would take. Philip estimated they could begin within a week, but Chester's displeased look made him tense. Realizing the urgency, Philip quickly corrected himself, promising to have everything ready within 2 to 3 days. As Philip left, he reviewed the document, considering the necessary steps, announcing applications, selecting suitable candidates, and gathering materials. Back in Chester's office, the conversation abruptly shifted. He questioned Gadin's failure to establish contact with the tower. Gadin, caught off guard, stammered a response, but Chester's sharp gaze indicated his dissatisfaction with the situation. Anxious, Gadin hastened to explain that the tower was difficult to track, constantly moving. Its last known location was near Madrinia for months prior. He assured Chester they were doing everything possible to locate it and inform the Tower of the Princesses, Chloe's, arrival. Chester pondered, wondering why it would be in Madrinia, a distant duchy far removed from the Barlock Empire. He instructed Gadin to gather as much information as possible, to which Gadin dutifully agreed. Changing the subject, Gadin hesitantly asked when Chester planned to tell Chloe. about the Ascanian family curse, the fate that destined its members to die at the hands of their beloved. Chester considered the situation. While he had briefly mentioned the curse to Chloe, he had never truly explained it to her. Initially, he had waited for the right moment, but now he worried that revealing the truth might frighten her. After a moment of silence, Chester finally responded, stating it was too soon to tell her. He understood Chloe was still adjusting to her new surroundings. He decided it was best to wait until she felt more settled before burdening her with the knowledge of the curse. There was no need to rush. He firmly instructed Gadin to remain silent about the curse and ensure no one else mentioned it in Chloe's presence. Gadin, though uncertain, wondered if it wouldn't be better to inform Chloe sooner rather than later. Nevertheless, he nodded, agreeing to follow Chester's orders. Suddenly, a loud, persistent knocking echoed from outside the office door. Gadin instinctively drew his sword, but it turned out to be a flustered servant. Stuttering, the servant rushed in, urgently informing Chester that his presence was required in the dining hall. Chester's heart lurched. The dining hall, where Chloe was. Panic began to set in. He anxiously asked if something had happened to her. The Ascania family followed a brutal tradition. To be declared heir to the throne, one had to assassinate the emperor, their own father. Chester Ascania was one who carried out this ritual without hesitation. Known for his coldness since childhood, some even believed him incapable of feeling. Gadin suddenly noticed something peculiar. Chester's eyes seemed to have turned green. Just then, a servant rushed in, urgently informing Chester that the princess refused to eat. Meanwhile, Chloe sat at the dining table, unaware of how much time had passed. It could have been 5 minutes, or perhaps 2 hours. She kept her eyes closed, avoiding the sight of the food, knowing it would only intensify her hunger. She reassured herself that it was bearable. After all, she had survived for days without food before. At least this time, she was warm and seated in a comfortable chair. A sudden growl from her stomach, however, embarrassed her. She hoped no one had heard. A concerned Chester rushed into the dining hall, calling Chloe's name. Seeing him, a smile bloomed on Chloe's face, and she greeted him cheerfully. Chester paused, taken aback by her smile. He felt a surge of unexpected joy. Kneeling beside her, he gently inquired if she was feeling unwell, as she hadn't touched her food. Chloe assured him she was fine. He then asked if she disliked the food, but she replied that everything looked delicious. Chester glanced at the spread, silently admitting it did look rather tempting. He curiously asked why she hadn't started eating yet. Chloe shyly confessed she had been waiting for him. Understanding dawned on Chester, and he offered a warm smile of relief. Apologizing for his tardiness, he explained that he'd had some matters to attend to. He then realized that from now on, he would need to have breakfast with Chloe every morning, and if possible, lunch and dinner as well. Suddenly, Chloe's stomach growled again. Chester quickly realized the source of the sound. Chloe blushed crimson. Chester, amused and sympathetic, gently told her that if he happened to be late in the future, she should start eating without him. Chloe happily nodded in agreement. Resolute, Chester determined to do his best not to be late again. During breakfast, Chloe hesitantly asked Chester if anyone else would be joining them. Chester replied that it would just be the two of them. Chloe felt a pang of disappointment. She had hoped to finally meet her other brothers. She wondered if they were intentionally avoiding her. Noticing her reaction, Chester explained that her second brother, Jed, was away on a mission, and her third brother, Ezra, rarely stayed at the palace. He assured her, however, that she would see Jed soon. At this, Chloe's spirits brightened. Chester went on to tell her that Jed was very eager to meet her. As for Ezra, he paused, then added that Ezra would likely rush back the moment he heard about her. He assured Chloe that Ezra would be overjoyed to learn he had a little sister. Surprised and delighted, Chloe asked if this was true. Chester confirmed that she would meet them soon. She just needed to wait a little longer. Chloe enthusiastically and eagerly agreed. As Chester personally served Chloe some food, a servant stood frozen in shock. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Chester, known for his ruthlessness, treating his sister with such tenderness seemed unimaginable. The servant even wondered if he needed to have his eyes checked. After serving her, Chester asked if she needed anything else. He knew she wasn't yet accustomed to making requests. Chloe hesitantly spoke up, surprising Chester as this seemed to be her first request. He curiously encouraged her to continue, assuming she would ask for a doll, a dress, jewelry, or a toy, anything she desired. However, Chloe asked him if he could also give Sunday a name. Slightly exasperated, Chester realized she was referring to the stubborn little creature. He hadn't expected this to be her first wish. Seeing Chloe's hopeful expression, Chester found himself unable to refuse her. He reluctantly agreed to consider it. Overjoyed, Chloe thanked him profusely, making Chester realize how much this small gesture meant to her. He encouraged her to ask for anything she desired, but she hesitated, having never been allowed to wish for anything growing up. When she finally voiced a request, it wasn't for herself, but rather, she hoped Chester would give her stuffed animal a name too. Chester was taken aback. Once again, she was thinking of others before herself. Wishing she would focus more on her own needs, Chester asked her what she truly wanted. After a moment of fidgeting, Chloe shyly admitted she wanted to learn to read and write. Chester immediately agreed, deciding this would be her first step forward. He reminded her to also make time for play, to which she enthusiastically agreed. Then, Chester declared he would build her a library of her very own. Chloe gasped, shocked, insisting she didn't need an entire library, just access to books. Realizing his wording might have been a bit daunting, Chester clarified that it would be more like a personal study, similar to the ones he and his brothers possessed. Hearing this, Chloe was overjoyed and thanked him. Seeing her excitement, Chester realized she had finally made a request for herself. Determined to support her, he decided her study couldn't just be any library. He would need to find the best tutors, someone who could perfectly teach her politics, economics, etiquette, and history. With this in mind, Chester concluded he would have to request a tutor from the academy. Meanwhile, Chloe, now genuinely happy, finally began to eat her breakfast. Chloe encountered Colin and greeted him cheerfully. When he inquired about her lunch, she excitedly shared that she had dined with Prince Chester, who had even served her food himself, and shared his dessert. She also mentioned that Chester had promised to dine with her every day from now on, leaving Colin stunned by the prince's unexpected kindness. Chloe then shared another exciting piece of news. She finally had a name. She proudly announced that her father, the Emperor, had named her Chloe Ascania. Seeing her joy, Colin found her endearing and asked if she would do him the honor of telling him her name. To Chloe's surprise, Colin suddenly knelt before her and formally introduced himself as Colin Nigel, a paladin of the Third Knight Order. He informed her that, from this day forward, he had been assigned as her personal guard, sworn to protect her from all harm. Though Chloe didn't fully understand everything Colin was saying, she understood one important thing. Colin would be by her side, protecting her. A bright smile bloomed on her face as she thanked him profusely, marking the beginning of their bond. Chloe reflected on how much she enjoyed being in the palace. She had delicious food to eat, a warm bed to sleep in, and most importantly, no one hurt or mistreated her. She wanted to stay here forever, so she resolved to be on her best behavior at all times, ensuring no one would dislike her or force her to leave. Colin playfully asked if Prince Chester had given her a hard time during lunch, but Chloe happily denied it, saying Chester had been very kind to her. She shared how he had promised to build her a huge study and teach her how to read and write, starting the next day. Colin was impressed and assured her that she was smart and would learn quickly, making Chloe beam. Just then, two servants entered her room, carrying a chair and a mirror. Colin informed her that the hairdresser had arrived. Chloe immediately grew apprehensive. Did this mean she had to cut her bangs? She recalled Chester telling her that people would admire her eyes, but she was still afraid to reveal them. However, she lacked the courage to say she didn't want to cut her hair, worried about bothering others or appearing selfish. Seeing Chloe's uneasy expression, Colin reassured her that if she liked her hair the way it was, she didn't have to change it. No one could force her to do anything. His words reminded Chloe of what Chester had told her earlier. She was free to make her own choices. Still hesitant, Chloe asked Colin if her eyes looked strange or unpleasant. Colin immediately denied it, telling her that quite the contrary. Her eyes were beautiful, he'd assured her, admiring their vibrant color, and no one would find them repulsive. Chloe recalled the hurtful words of Miriam and her former master, who had called her eyes disgusting, a symbol of misfortune. Yet, she realized that within the palace walls, neither Chester, Colin, Philip, nor the servants had uttered a single negative word about her eyes. It made her feel a surge of confidence. With newfound resolve, she told Colin, "I want to get bangs." When he asked if she was sure, she replied firmly yes. She wanted to look different. Alesh, the capital of the Balrog Empire, thrived under the protection of an ancient dragon, making it a hub for music, art, fashion, and beauty. Among the city's top beauty salons, Sarah's hair salon stood out. Renowned hairstylist Sarah Meyer felt both honored and surprised to be summoned to cut Princess Chloe's hair. However, before meeting Chloe, Philip warned her to choose her words carefully, as the princess was a sensitive girl. Sarah inwardly speculated that sensitive probably just meant Chloe was a spoiled brat, but she politely agreed to be mindful. When she entered and curtsied to Chloe in greeting, she was taken aback by the princess's demeanor. Chloe appeared polite and well-mannered, quite unlike what Sarah had anticipated. She found it odd that Chloe bore no resemblance to Crown Prince Chester, leading her to wonder if the princess truly shared the Ascania bloodline. Chloe cheerfully introduced herself to Sarah, and Sarah was struck by her lively personality, shooting a look at Philip that questioned his earlier warning about Chloe's sensitivity. When Sarah asked Chloe if she had a preferred hairstyle in mind, Chloe simply requested bangs, admitting she had never had her hair cut before. As Sarah ran her fingers through Chloe's hair, she realized it was in terrible condition, needing more than just a trim for her bangs. Sarah explained that Chloe's ends were severely damaged, recommending a significant cut to allow healthy hair growth. Colin expressed concern about the length being cut, but Sarah insisted it was necessary. While examining Chloe's hands, Sarah noticed a symbol resembling a slave mark and wondered how an imperial princess could bear such a mark. However, Chloe confidently told her to cut it all, saying the hair grows back, so it didn't matter. Snapping back to her senses, Sarah reminded herself of Chloe's royal status and bowed respectfully before beginning the haircut. Chloe closed her eyes in anticipation. When she saw her new look, Chloe gasped. Sarah asked Chloe if she liked it and suggested tying her hair back with a ribbon. Chloe stared at the assortment of ribbons, and Sarah picked a green one, the same color as the sapling Chloe had received from the Emperor. Sarah complimented her, saying the color suited her perfectly, causing Chloe to blush and thank Sarah. Sarah then asked Philip and Colin for their opinions. Philip enthusiastically praised Chloe, saying she looked lovely, and Colin agreed, stating that the hairstyle suited her. Sarah felt a pang of frustration, thinking how men always gave the same perfunctory compliments. Chloe shyly asked if they truly thought so. Colin, with a gentle smile, told her he felt honored to be able to see her beautiful face every day from now on. After the haircut, Sarah told Chloe to call her anytime she needed a trim and promised to keep her looking her best. Chloe thanked her with a smile, saying she wanted Sarah to cut her hair again next time. Sarah was pleased, thinking Chloe liked her. Philip then told Sarah she had earned her pay and gestured for her to follow him. Before leaving, Sarah voiced her concern to Philip about the mark on Chloe's hand, suggesting the princess should wear gloves to conceal it. Philip, realizing its significance, noted how Chloe often rested one hand on top of the other, likely to hide the mark. Philip then advised Sarah that sometimes it was better to pretend not to notice certain things. Sarah admitted this, but explained her concerns stemmed from genuine worry for Chloe. Philip recalled his initial reservations about Sarah Meyer, fueled by rumors of her being solely motivated by money. However, witnessing her care for Chloe, he realized she had developed a fondness for the princess. He also acknowledged Chloe's innate ability to leave a positive impression on people. Touched by Sarah's honesty and concern, Philip appointed her as Chloe's personal hairdresser, instructing her to come to the palace daily to style Chloe's hair. And so, Sarah Meyer, the capital's most renowned hairdresser, officially became Chloe's personal stylist. After entering the palace, Chloe felt time fly by. She now wore new, elegant dresses every day, studied to her heart's content, enjoyed delicious snacks, and received all the toys she could possibly desire. Most importantly, Prince Chester dined with her every evening, which made her feel even more cherished. Before she knew it, a month had passed in the blink of an eye. A month later, Chloe awoke with a flutter of happiness and excitement, for she was finally going to see Sunday again. Her mind raced with all the things she wanted to tell him, about how no one mistreated them here, how they had delicious food to eat, and how she even had a gift for him. As Philip helped her get ready, he informed her that starting tomorrow, maidservants would be responsible for dressing her. Chloe, taken aback by the news, reacted with surprise. Philip explained that these maidservants had been personally selected after rigorous testing to ensure they met her standards. Chloe's heart pounded at the thought of meeting new people again tomorrow. Just then, a servant knocked on the door, informing Philip that Sir Radvold had arrived with the young boy. Philip granted them permission to enter. A mixture of curiosity and nervous anticipation filled Chloe as she eagerly awaited Sunday's entrance. Upon seeing him, Chloe's face lit up with joy. However, her smile faltered as Sunday formally bowed to her, addressing her as Your Highness. Chloe was speechless, wondering why he acted like a complete stranger instead of being happy to see her. As Sunday entered, Heath scolded him for walking too fast, telling him to slow down. Chloe thanked Heath for bringing Sunday, to which Heath responded by complimenting her appearance, saying she had become much prettier. However, just as he was about to make an inappropriate remark about her previous hairstyle, Colin struck him from behind, rebuking him for his careless words to the princess. Regaining his composure, Heath formally introduced himself as Heath Radvold, a paladin of the Third Knight Order. Chloe politely responded, introducing herself as Chloe Ascania. Heath noted that Chloe seemed much happier than when they first met and expressed his pleasure that she now had a proper name. Meanwhile, Chloe observed that Heath hadn't changed much, but Sunday felt different. She smiled warmly at Sunday, expressing her joy at seeing him again and asking how he had been. However, to her surprise, Sunday remained formal and distant, simply replying, "Yes, Your Highness, thank you for your concern." Chloe longed to see Sunday smile like he used to and wondered what she could do to make him happy. Eager to cheer him up, she excitedly took his hand, telling him she had something for him. She called him Theo, believing that hearing his new name would bring him joy. Chloe explained that Theo was an ancient word meaning gift of God, and that the name suited him perfectly. However, to her disappointment, Sunday remained sullen and unresponsive, offering no smile. A confused Chloe reintroduced herself, hoping to connect with him, but she couldn't understand why he seemed so sad. She wondered if he perhaps disliked the name she had given him, or if perhaps he already had another name in his heart. Just as she suggested they could change it, Sunday gasped loudly and began to say, "No, I like..." But then his expression quickly darkened, and in a dull, emotionless tone he said, "I gladly accept the name you have bestowed upon me." "Thank you, Your Highness." Seeing him like this, Chloe grew deeply concerned. She quietly whispered to Colin for help, hoping he knew what was wrong. However, Colin apologized, saying he didn't know anything either, which only worried Chloe more. Late that night, Chloe was plagued by thoughts of Theo, wondering why he had changed so much. She fell asleep and dreamed of him. In her dream, Chloe called out to Theo, asking him why he was acting so distant, where his smile had gone. But Theo turned and began to walk away. Panicked, Chloe pleaded with him not to go, but he vanished. She woke with a start, gasping for breath. Still distraught, Chloe wondered if Theo now hated her, thinking that was why he spoke so formally and didn't smile. Unable to sleep, she decided to go find him immediately. As she opened her door, she noticed Colin was missing, which was unusual. Despite a wave of fear, she convinced herself to keep going. As she walked, she realized she was lost. The hallway seemed to stretch on endlessly. Suddenly, she saw a tall man approaching. The man asked her what she was doing there, and Chloe immediately noticed his platinum blonde hair and blue eyes. Though he didn't look exactly like Crown Prince Chester, she nervously asked Crown Prince Chester. The man let out a smug chuckle and said, "That's hilarious. Wait till Big Brother hears about this." Chloe realized that if he was calling Crown Prince Chester Big Brother, then he must be Prince Jed. When she asked him, Jed seemed surprised, then confirmed it. However, as he looked at Chloe, he reacted dramatically, questioning if she was truly his little sister. Jed stared at her in disbelief, exclaiming, "No way. You look so different." Chloe felt a pang of dejection, while Jed muttered, "How could a cute girl like you be one of us? I don't believe it." Chloe was taken aback by Jed's comment about her appearance. Jed jokingly wondered how their father could have such a pretty daughter, guessing she took after her mother. When he asked for her opinion, Chloe hesitated. Jed then affectionately pinched her cheek, causing Chloe to yelp in pain. He pulled her cheeks further apart, calling her cute, but she protested, telling him to stop. Jed laughed, saying he wished her cheeks were chubbier and that she needed to eat more. Despite her glare, Jed continued to find it amusing, formally introducing himself as Jed Ascania, the second prince, and offering his greetings to their young savior. Chloe politely introduced herself as Chloe Ascania, his younger sister. Jed was impressed by her formality, ruffled her hair, and complimented her. Though she thanked him, she was pondering his playful nature. Realizing that despite his mischievousness, he didn't seem like a bad person, she didn't dislike him. Suddenly, Jed pulled her into a hug, making Chloe tense up. He insisted she not call him Your Highness, but Brother Jed. Chloe hesitantly called him Brother Jed, which made him ecstatic. Seeing his joyful reaction, Chloe was shocked that such simple words could make someone so happy. She wished she could bring that same joy to everyone around her, just like in this moment. Chloe thought of everyone she had met, including Crown Prince Chester, Colin, Philip, her newly discovered brother Jed, and Theo. Suddenly, she remembered Theo, feeling a surge of urgency to see him. She tugged on Jed's shirt, asking him to put her down so she could go see her friend. However, Jed refused, saying it was too late and children should be asleep. Chloe pouted, insisting she wasn't a baby, but Jed chuckled and said she was indeed a little one. He told her to wait until morning, as her friend was probably asleep too. Chloe reluctantly agreed, realizing Theo probably was asleep, and if she woke him, he might be angry. She reflected on how she saw Theo as a younger brother and wanted to care for him, yet doubted if she was truly a good person. Jed led Chloe back to her room, where they found Colin frantically searching for her. Jed, perplexed, asked Colin where he'd been. Colin, a mixture of shock and nervousness, questioned how Jed had come to be with the princess. Jed excitedly explained that he'd stumbled upon her outside and had been informed that she was his sister. Colin sighed inwardly, thinking Jed acted as if he were the only one with a sister. Then, Jed patted Chloe's head, teasing Colin with a prediction that she would grow into a great beauty, jesting that her line of suitors would stretch halfway across the continent. Colin conceded that Chloe was adorable, but deemed it far too early to be discussing her future admirers. Instead, he was more concerned with the more pressing matter at hand, how she had managed to leave her room. Chloe, feeling nervous, apologized, but Colin quickly reassured her that it wasn't something she needed to apologize for. However, Jed sarcastically remarked that it wasn't Chloe's fault, but rather Colin's negligence as her personal knight, implying that he was the one who should be begging forgiveness. A chill ran down Colin's spine as he realized that even if the crown prince had called him away, leaving Chloe unguarded was a grave mistake. If anything had happened to her in that short time, it would have been his responsibility. Overwhelmed with guilt, Colin knelt before Chloe, sincerely apologizing and begging for her forgiveness. Chloe, startled and flustered, quickly explained that she had only wanted to see Theo. She had intended to ask Colin to accompany her, but since he wasn't there, she had gone alone. Jed poked Chloe gently, warning her that she'd been lucky this time, but she must never wander around alone at night, as there were monsters in the palace. He then settled her into bed and dismissed Colin, telling him he could leave now. Colin obeyed, but his downcast demeanor as he left upset Chloe. She wondered if Colin no longer liked her because of this incident. Seeing Chloe's sorrowful expression, Jed decided to stay, sitting beside her. He asked if she wanted to hear a story from the past, which instantly brightened Chloe's spirits. Jed began to tell Chloe a story about a cruel prince who was cursed to die at the hands of the one he loved. This curse wasn't limited to him alone. Due to the mistake of an ancestor, it affected all his blood relatives, passed down through each generation. Chloe started to feel drowsy as she listened, but Jed continued. He explained that the cursed family was taught from a young age never to give their heart to anyone, not even their own kin. Family and loved ones were the most dangerous, as they could easily breach the walls around their hearts. Because of this, the Ascania imperial family rarely interacted with their own relatives. This led to a disturbing tradition. To become emperor, one had to assassinate their own father. Although considered immoral by those outside the Ascania Empire, it was a necessary ritual to prove that no one, not even their parents, held a place in their hearts. Upon hearing this, Chloe pondered the story silently, then softly said she felt that the people involved must be very sad. Jed, surprised, asked who she meant, the assassin or the assassinated. Chloe simply replied, both. She believed it must have been agonizing for them to pretend not to care, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Chloe reflected that it was deeply saddening that instead of proving their love, the cursed family members were forced to prove they didn't love each other. Jed agreed, saying it would be easier if they truly hated one another. But since that wasn't the case, they were left with only loneliness, unable to be close to their family, make friends, or even fall in love. He patted Chloe's forehead gently, explaining that several princes who had fallen in love met tragic ends, proving how dangerous love was for their bloodline. The curse robbed them of the right to love, and the solace of being loved, making it crueler than any other curse. That's why the emperors keep their distance from everyone. If they don't love, they won't die. They never appoint an empress either, because the empress is the most likely person to kill them. Jed wondered if feigning affection could be a loophole to avoid loneliness, but ultimately, emotions can't be hidden, especially for Chloe, whose eyes had turned red, reflecting her deep sadness. Their eye color changes with their emotions: black for anger, red for sadness, purple for excitement, green for anxiety, and when they fall in love, it changes to another color. Jed continued to tell Chloe a story about an emperor who, like his ancestors, was cursed to die at the hands of the one he loved. To avoid this fate, he distanced himself from others, refusing to fall in love. However, all stories begin when something unusual happens. One day, a woman walked into the emperor's life. She was someone who drew people to her, making them smile and laugh naturally. Despite his efforts to remain indifferent, the emperor fell deeply in love for the first time. The monster who had locked himself in darkness felt the warmth and light of spring. He loved her so much that he thought it wouldn't matter if he died by her hand. But of course, the woman knew what he was thinking. Jed mused that if there were no obstacles, the emperor and the woman could have had a happy ending like a fairy tale. However, a wicked villain stood before them, becoming an obstacle between them. Thus, the lovers began to drift apart. Jed didn't want to tell Chloe the painful details, but he focused on the most important part: their love bore child. Unlike Chester, Jed, and Ezra, who were born out of political ambition and necessity, Chloe was different. The emperor had other children to consolidate his power, and their mothers didn't care for them unless they could help them secure the title of empress. But Chloe's mother was different. Until her last breath, she fought to protect Chloe, even knowing that defying the powerful forces around her could lead to her death. Jed gently comforted Chloe, telling her she was born of true love, so she never had to worry about being hated by anyone. He admitted that when he first heard about having a little sister, he was curious about her. Now, meeting her, she wasn't what he imagined, but that only made him adore her more. He patted her head, telling her not to worry, giving her the comfort and reassurance she needed. As Chloe slept, she unconsciously grabbed Jed's hand, which deeply moved him. He silently vowed to punish any wicked villain for her sake, thinking that since ancient times, it has been the prince's duty to deal with villains. The next morning, Chloe woke up, recalling a story she had heard before falling asleep. It was a story about people having to assassinate their own fathers, and she wondered if it was just an old tale or if there was some truth to it. If what Jed said was true, then the emperor had to stab his father with a sword, which reminded her of Chester, the crown prince. She quickly dismissed the thought, reassuring herself that while Chester was sometimes intimidating, he wasn't a bad person. She believed it was just an old story, like his playful habit of pinching her cheeks. Getting out of bed, she decided to tell Chester to stop doing that the next time she saw him. Noticing the stuffed toy in her hand, she wondered when Chester would give it a name, since he had even suggested a name for Theo. She hugged the toy affectionately, determined to remind him again at dinner. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts, and a voice called out to her. She responded with a bright smile. 5 maids entered the room, and Chloe looked at them curiously, wondering who they were. Then she noticed Colin and Philip behind them. Seeing that Colin seemed all right after the previous day's events, she felt relieved. Colin bowed and greeted her, and she returned the gesture with a smile, exchanging good mornings. However, her attention was quickly caught by one of the maids staring at her, which made her uneasy. As Colin asked her if she slept well, her focus remained on the woman, wondering if she had done something wrong. Philip formally announced that he would introduce the maids who would now be attending to her. They introduced themselves one by one as Amy Carter and Jessie Wales. Finally, the maid who had been staring at her stepped forward, curtsied, and introduced herself as Linda Parai, the head maid in charge of the palace staff, and the one responsible for looking after the princess. Chloe hesitantly greeted Linda, noticing the others smiling. while Linda seemed displeased. She wondered if Linda disliked her, perhaps because of her eyes. As sadness welled up, her green eyes reflected her emotions. Colin, sensing something amiss, asked if she was all right, but Linda interrupted him, addressing Chloe directly. She politely requested permission to speak, which made Chloe even more nervous, worried she had done something wrong. Flustered, Chloe granted permission. Linda formally bowed and explained that, as Chloe was a noble, everyone around her was of lower standing, except for the emperor, the crown prince, and the other princes. She warned that some might misinterpret Chloe's kindness and try to take advantage of her naivety. A lack of proper decorum from maids and nobles could lead to gossip, and even those of high standing might disrespect her if they perceived her as weak. Linda advised Chloe to be mindful of this, as it was necessary for her own protection. Chloe hesitated, absorbing Linda's words. Linda observed her reaction, realizing Chloe was much softer-hearted than she had initially thought. Then Chloe asked if that meant Linda didn't actually dislike her or find her unpleasant. Linda was taken aback, flustered by the question, and quickly reassured Chloe that she would never dare dislike or find her unpleasant. Chloe beamed, relieved that Linda didn't dislike her. Determined to improve, she promised to remember Linda's advice and strive to be more astute, hoping that if she did, people wouldn't dislike her. She bowed to Linda, asking for her guidance. Linda was surprised by Chloe's humility, thinking that while etiquette was important, having a good heart was more so. She realized Chloe was unlike any other child she had met. In response, Linda returned the bow, saying she would also be under Chloe's care. Later, Chloe sat at the dining table, looking around and inquiring about Crown Prince Chester. Linda informed her that he couldn't dine with her due to work, but had sent a gift as an apology. Chloe marveled at the sprout-shaped gem, thinking that while Crown Prince Chester was a bit intimidating, he wasn't a bad person. Linda suggested Chloe take a walk in the garden after her meal, as she had no lessons today. Chloe agreed, but asked if she could see her friend Theo first. Linda was surprised to hear Chloe had a friend, wondering why she had never been informed of this. However, Chloe excitedly mentioned that Theo should be awake by now, and eagerly anticipated seeing him again, hoping he wouldn't act strangely as he had before. Linda asked where Chloe's friend lived, and Chloe replied that Colin had mentioned he wasn't far from the palace. Linda wondered if Theo was a noble boy living in the outer city, but she couldn't recall any noble child with that name. Seeing Linda's serious expression, Chloe became saddened, her eyes turning green. She hesitantly asked if she couldn't see Theo after all. However, Linda smiled reassuringly and said it wasn't a problem, offering to prepare some snack for her and her friend to share. Linda thought it was good that Chloe had a friend for comfort and saw it as an opportunity to help her eat more, as Chloe had a poor appetite and was undernourished, smaller than other children her age, and Crown Prince Chester was very concerned about Chloe's health. Linda, eager to support Chloe in any way she could, offered her encouragement. Chloe readily agreed, her excitement bubbling, and Linda promised to have a selection of treats prepared after she finished her meal. Upon finishing her meal, Chloe discovered a table laden with an assortment of desserts, strawberry mousse, charlotte cake, and apple custard pudding. The chef, beaming with pride, declared them the perfect accompaniment to any tea. The sweet aroma hung heavy in the air as Linda reminded Chloe to return promptly for dinner. Chloe, already brimming with anticipation, happily agreed. Just then Colin arrived. Noticing the prepared treats, he inquired curiously if Chloe was planning a picnic. Confused by the term, Chloe clarified that she was simply going to visit Theo. However, a flicker of concern crossed Colin's face. He voiced his worries about their relationship, given Chloe's status as a princess and Theo's as a homeless orphan. He fretted that Theo might harbor feelings of jealousy or resentment towards her. With Chloe's safety in mind, he wondered if it might be best to discourage their meetings. Chloe, her voice laced with urgency, asked if Colin knew where Theo was, expressing her strong desire to see him. Her eyes, shimmering with a verdant glow, a telltale sign of her heightened emotions, caught Colin's attention. Colin hesitated, a conflict playing across his features. Ultimately, he decided to prioritize her happiness, agreeing to take her to Theo, believing the boy would also be overjoyed to see her. As Chloe prepared to leave, Linda entrusted her safety to Sir Nysel, who reassured her there was no need for concern. With Colin leading the way, Chloe skipped along, her mind buzzing with thoughts of what she would say to Theo. She hoped he would enjoy the treats, and imagined his room to be as grand as her own. She also looked forward to showing him the treasures she had received from the Emperor. Suddenly, a hand reached out from behind and scooped Chloe into the air. Startled, she turned to see who had lifted her. A gasp escaped her lips. Colin rushed to her side, but the man holding her simply laughed. It was Prince Zed. Colin, visibly relieved, addressed him respectfully as Your Highness. Chloe, still slightly bewildered, offered a hesitant greeting. Zed playfully pinched her cheek, insisting she call him brother or simply Zed rather than using formal titles, reminding her that she was their savior. He then inquired where she was headed, and she nervously replied that she was going to see her friend. Meanwhile, in his flustered state, Colin accidentally knocked over the picnic basket. He immediately apologized, guilt washing over him for not handling the basket properly while preparing to protect the princess. Chloe, however, reassured him that he hadn't done anything wrong. Zed, on the other hand, dramatically scolded Colin for upsetting his little sister's basket of treats. He declared that Colin must atone for his mistake. With a mischievous glint in his eye, Zed announced that he and Chloe would now be going out alone, just the two of them, on a little secret adventure. The Valak Empire, protected by an ancient dragon bound by contract, boasted an inviolable capital where the Ascania bloodline remained untouched by harm. With no threats to worry about, the people indulged in various hobbies, including a penchant for exquisite cuisine. Chloe gasped at the sight of an enormous cake. This prompted Zed to urge her to try it, claiming it was the third most delicious cake in the world. Chloe hesitated, her thoughts drifting to Colin and Theo. The cake seemed too large, meant for sharing. Zed playfully poked her nose, telling her to eat as much as she wanted to grow big and strong. Chloe, however, insisted that it was wrong to waste food. Memories of her time as a slave, where she was punished for not finishing her meals, surfaced. She also felt guilty about leaving such an expensive cake uneaten. Zed acknowledged her reasoning, but reassured her that she didn't need to force herself. Chloe then suggested taking the rest to go, her cleverness impressing Zed. Just then, a woman approached, addressing Zed formally. Turning, cake in hand, Chloe was struck by the woman's dazzling presence, thinking to herself that she looked incredibly radiant. Viola of the Hanover family greeted Prince Zed, expressing surprise at his presence in such a place, though Zed scoffed at the notion of it being mere coincidence. She insisted he call her by her name. It was then that Viola noticed Chloe. She stepped forward and inquired about Viola's identity, though Zed coolly remarked that someone as well informed as she must already know. Inwardly, he criticized Viola's appearance, suspecting it was deliberate, even as he tried to ensure Chloe wouldn't feel burdened by the outsider's presence. Given the Hanover family's ambitions for the position of Empress, he doubted this was a coincidence. Zed informally introduced Chloe as the sole princess of Ascania. Chloe, impressed by Viola's presence, politely greeted her. Viola responded warmly, introducing herself and asking Chloe to look after her. Meanwhile, Zed wondered if Viola was putting on an act or genuinely fond of Chloe. Viola approached Chloe, politely asking if she would attend a small gathering she was hosting. She expressed her hope that Chloe's first friend would be her younger brother, Edgar. Zed immediately saw through Viola's true intentions, recognizing the invitation as a political maneuver to establish an early connection with the princess. Annoyed, Zed glared at Viola, bluntly telling her to stop her charade and leave. Viola, startled, flinched before quickly making an excuse, claiming she was merely shopping for an upcoming tea party and hadn't intended to impose on their time. She then excused herself and departed. Once she was gone, Zed muttered that he disliked people like her, sly foxes who would do anything to get what they wanted. Chloe, puzzled, inquired about the fox. Zed explained, using the metaphor, that Viola was like a fox, potentially feigning kindness but harboring ulterior motives. He warned Chloe that Viola might try to use her, and neither he nor her brother would want that. Chloe took his words to heart, deciding against attending the gathering. Though she found the situation difficult to grasp, she understood Zed's concern for her. Zed affectionately patted Chloe's forehead, praising her intelligence and assuring her he would accompany her if needed. Chloe blushed at the thought of going with him. Later that evening, as Chloe and Zed walked home hand in hand. They unexpectedly encountered Chester, waiting with a carriage. Chester stated that it was getting late, so he had come to retrieve her. Without hesitation, he scooped Chloe into his arms, preparing to take her home. Zed, realizing he was being left behind, sarcastically commented on Chester's overreaction, as if he intended to lock Chloe away. Unfazed, Chester sternly told Zed to walk. Zed protested in shock, but Chester ignored him, driving off with Chloe, leaving Zed to yell after them in frustration. Inside the carriage, Chloe hesitantly asked if Brother Zed would be all right. Her informal address surprised Chester. Chloe panicked, wondering if she shouldn't have said that. Chester muttered something under his breath, but when Chloe asked what he'd said, he dismissed it as nothing. Chester then inquired if anything else had happened. Chloe mentioned the party invitation she had received. When Chester asked who it was from, she told him it was Viola of the Hanover family. Chester patted her head, approving of her good memory and quick learning. Chloe modestly denied it, but thanked him nonetheless. She then shared that Brother Zed had advised her against attending, explaining that he'd warned her to be wary of those who might try to use her. Chester listened, seemingly lost in thought. Chester explained that while some might try to use Chloe, others would genuinely want to support her. As the sole princess of Ascania, these people would stand by her, ready to serve and assist whenever needed. Chloe hesitantly asked if this was different from servitude. Chester assured her it was entirely different. He also told her that in the future, she would receive many invitations, too many to attend them all, and if she didn't want to go, she didn't have to. Chloe clasped her hands tightly, deciding against it for now. She admitted she still had much to learn, and as Linda had pointed out, her etiquette was lacking, and she worried about making mistakes and causing trouble. Chester agreed, and instructed her to always send a proper reply whenever she received an invitation. Chloe eagerly nodded in agreement. A while later, as Chloe gazed out of the carriage window, a look of astonishment washed over her face. She noticed a building materialize where there had been empty space just moments before, only to vanish again as quickly as it had appeared. Confused, she wondered if her eyes had deceived her. The carriage arrived at the Imperial Palace, and the coachman informed Chester of their arrival. Chloe, meanwhile, was brimming with excitement at the prospect of seeing Theo. Walking down the hallway with Colin, she happily shared the news that Chester had named a baby dragon caiman, inspired by one of the most powerful ancient dragons. In a flashback, Chester suggested the name Cayman, much to Chloe's delight. Back in the present, she remarked that the name suited its black eyes perfectly, and Colin agreed. Chloe then inquired whether her brother, Zed, had returned to the palace. Colin confirmed his return, mentioning that Zed had gone straight to his office, despite having earlier dragged the guards outside for training. A flashback showed Zed reprimanding the guards, reminding them of their duty to properly protect the princess. However, his underlying frustration stemmed from being left behind while Chester escorted Chloe away. Back in the present, Colin reflected on his own inadequacy as a guard. Although Zed was the Empire's finest swordsman, Colin felt he had to formally request training, unable to forgive himself for failing to prevent the princess from being taken. As Chloe glanced toward Chester's office, she asked Colin if Zed was angry and whether he would fight with Chester. Colin reassured her, explaining that the two weren't close enough to come to blows. Chloe, feeling nervous, inquired about the nature of Chester and Zed's relationship. Colin hesitated, then explained that they were simply indifferent to each other, seeing each other perhaps once a year. When Chloe asked why, Colin struggled to answer, bound by Chester's prohibition against discussing anything related to the curse. Chloe, however, already knew, revealing that Zed had told her, the curse that said they would be killed by the ones they love. A stunned Colin confirmed that this was the reason for their infrequent contact, as emotional bonds were more easily formed between family, and that could be dangerous. Chloe grew somber, realizing they avoided each other to prevent such connections from forming. But suddenly, a realization dawned on her, her expression brightening. If she was here now, didn't that mean the curse was irrelevant? She recalled the words etched in her mind since her arrival, beginning to piece everything together. Chester had said that if a female of Modiakimian bloodline were born, she would break the royal family's curse. Now, with the princess of Ascania's presence, the curse should be completely lifted. Excitement bubbling within her, Chloe asked if Chester and Zed could now get along. Colin chuckled in agreement, but mentioned that while their relationship might improve, it might not be in the way Chloe imagined. When she asked him what he meant, he deflected, suggesting they hurry to see the young boy she was looking for. Colin directed her to Theo's room, telling her it was the fourth room at the end of the hallway on the right. Chloe's spirits lifted, and she eagerly ran off to see Theo, picturing them having dinner together, sharing cake, and asking him about his journey. However, she stopped abruptly, a look of shock freezing her features. In the hallway, she saw a boy mopping the floor. It was Theo. Just then, a man called out to Theo, telling him to stop mopping and go help prepare dinner in the kitchen. How obedini ziplit understol. Theo followed the man, leaving Chloe feeling a pang of sadness and guilt. She had assumed Theo lived a life similar to hers, comfortable and filled with special treatment, but now realized how different their circumstances were. She worried that Theo might resent her for her luxurious life while he struggled. Seeing Chloe's distress, Colin gently consoled her, saying that Theo already understood the difference in their stations and that she shouldn't feel too burdened. However, a frustrated Chloe abruptly declared that she wanted to see Chester. Meanwhile, in Chester's office, Zed sarcastically remarked that the pen seemed mightier than the sword, his tone laced with discontent. Chester warned him against dragging Chloe into his reckless schemes. Zed retorted, accusing Chester of cowardly abandoning his adorable younger brother. Chester scoffed at the descriptor, stating that in Zed's lexicon, adorable must surely translate to nauseating. Chester's expression turned serious. Taking Chloe out of the palace was still dangerous, he stressed. In fact, something unexpected had happened today, something even Zed hadn't anticipated. The two men discussed Viola Hanover, with Zed suggesting that if she proved troublesome, he could eliminate her, disguising it as an accident. Chester dismissed the idea, saying it wasn't necessary yet. Then, shifting the subject, Zed revealed a deep disdain for Viola's father, Lord Hanover, harboring a potent hatred for him because of Erica. Chester questioned whether the Hanover family had played a role in the tragedy that had unfolded 10 years prior. Zed conceded the possibility, but admitted they lacked sufficient evidence. While it remained unclear whether Lord Hanover was directly involved in the murder of the child's mother, Erica, they couldn't entirely rule him out. A frustrated Zed pointed out that there should at least be some persons of interest connected to the case, but the scarcity of clues hindered any concrete conclusions. Zed had been investigating Erica Graham's murder for 10 years, but the lack of leads had stalled any substantial progress. When Erica was killed, Chloe had been sold to slave traders. The Emperor had been away on a war of conquest at the time. He returned, not to Erica, but to her grave, with scandalous rumors about their relationship swirling through the capital. Unable to bear the blow, the Emperor had returned to the battlefield, seemingly seeking solace in war. As a result, Chester had been forced to shoulder the responsibilities of regency at a young age, managing affairs in his father's absence. Zed expressed his frustration with the case, lamenting the abundance of suspects and the dearth of evidence. Chester then pointed out that the most likely suspect was his own mother, a suggestion to which Zed reluctantly agreed. Chester and Zed discussed the prime suspects in Erica Graham's murder. Chester noted that not only Zed's mother, but also his own mother and Ezra's mother were potential culprits, as they all despised Erica and her potential to become the first empress. Zed concurred, stating that calling it jealousy was an understatement. They outright hated her. They also considered that any noble family aspiring to a royal marriage could be a suspect. Erica, aware of the danger, had kept Chloe's birth a secret. Chloe was special to the Emperor, and her daughter possessed the power to break the royal curse. Revealing the truth would have put them both in peril. Therefore, Erica rarely left her estate, and few knew of Chloe's existence. Zed suspected a traitor amongst Erica's confidants, Marchioness Graham, Erica's governess, 3 maids, and a midwife. Chester added that the midwife had been killed by Marchioness Graham, an act that occurred just after Chester had pledged to protect Erica. It was likely an attempt to prevent any rumors from spreading. However, with all of them, Erica, the midwife, the governess, the maids, even the Marchioness, dead, it remained a mystery who had leaked the information about Erica's child. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps caught Chester and Zed's attention. Chloe burst into Chester's office, calling out in a tone of indignation. Chester turned to her in surprise, then glared at Colin. Colin cowered under Chester's admonishing gaze. Chloe stormed into Chester's office, fuming, reminding him that he had told her she could freely express her desires. When Chester confirmed this, Zed teased her, curious about what she wanted. Chloe declared firmly, Theo. Zed, perplexed, asked what she meant. Chloe clarified that Theo was her friend. Seeing her resolute expression, Zed patted her head and turned to Chester, realizing that Chester already knew who Theo was. Chester confirmed that Theo was the child who had chosen to come with Chloe. Zed asked what was the matter with Chloe's friend, Theo. Chloe hesitated, her emotions welling up, but Chester stepped forward and knelt before her. He gently encouraged her to speak slowly. Chloe reminded Chester that he had told her she wouldn't have to do chores like cleaning or laundry anymore. Chester reassured her that those tasks were never meant for her. However, Chloe then asked if Theo had to do those jobs in order to stay. Chester explained that Theo's situation was different from hers, but Chloe grew more urgent, insisting that while it might be different for him, it wasn't for her. She recalled how Theo had shared his bread with her when she was punished and left hungry, and how he had secretly helped her with her chores. Her voice was thick with gratitude and determination. She declared that she didn't want Theo to suffer while she lived comfortably. Chloe reflected on how she liked the kind people here, and how, out of fear of being abandoned, she had always tried to be a good child. But where Theo was concerned, she decided that even if speaking up made her a bad child, she would do it. She stated firmly that Theo was a precious friend who had always helped her during her hardships. Zed reassured her that Theo would never starve or be mistreated here, but Chloe insisted that wasn't enough because she and Theo had become different. She wondered what Theo thought when he called her princess and bowed his head. If their positions were reversed, Theo would be happy for her improved life, but he would also struggle with the fact they couldn't be together as they once were. It wasn't jealousy, but a feeling of distance from a bond they once shared. Tears welling in her eyes, Chloe desperately asked, with a tinge of sadness, how she could continue to be friends with Theo if there was any way at all. Zed comforted her, saying there was a way, and Chloe's face instantly brightened. He suggested that while Theo couldn't be brought into the royal family, he could be made a noble. Chester then called for Colin, formally addressing him as Paladin Nizzle, and asked what he thought about adding a new member to their family. Colin was utterly shocked and caught off guard by the proposal. Sitting alone in his room, Theo felt a pang of sadness as he recalled how his mother had abandoned him in the mountains, leading to his capture by slave traders. In a flashback, he remembered the unbearable agony of his captivity, the hunger, the pain, and the fear of dying in such wretched circumstances. Hatred for his mother and the slave traders festered within him, and he vowed to escape no matter the cost. As the days bled into weeks, his heart grew consumed by darkness. One day, he sensed someone entering his cell and thought, who would be foolish enough to risk being caught and beaten by coming in here? To his astonishment, it was Chloe, the girl formerly known as Wednesday. She gently patted his head and comforted him. A stunned Theo asked why she was helping him. Chloe smiled and replied that she wanted to help because he felt like a younger brother, even though she might actually be older than him. Laughing, Chloe told Theo that since he was smaller, she wouldn't believe he was older until he grew taller than her. Theo recalled how, after that day, Wednesday, Chloe visited him every day. Her warm touch was something he had never experienced before, and for the first time, he felt like he might cry from the kindness she showed. Because of her, he made a decision. He wouldn't escape alone. He would take her with him. Although their escape hadn't happened the way he'd imagined, he was glad Chloe was being treated well now. Still, he couldn't help but feel lonely and wished he could see her up close, even if only occasionally. Just then, a knock echoed on his door. Theo wondered if it could be Chloe. He quickly opened the door, surprised to see her, but then noticed Zed standing before her. Zed looked Theo up and down and greeted him. Being addressed as our little friend surprised Theo. Chloe, eager to see him, tried to push past Zed to get to him. Meanwhile, Theo bowed respectfully. He recognized Zed as the second prince, having seen the crown prince before and knowing the youngest prince wasn't at the palace. Zed reached out as if to touch Theo's forehead, but Theo instinctively recoiled. He dodged Zed's hand. Zed, amused, commented on Theo's quick reflexes and sharp mind, saying he wasn't particularly fond of clever children like him. Chloe called out Zed's name worriedly, but he touched Theo's forehead anyway, noting that Theo was both keen and witty. He remarked that he would have preferred Theo to be more naive and dull, as having a clever friend by Chloe's side could be troublesome. Zed then stated he'd given his warning, and, since Chloe had asked him to leave, he would. However, before he could finish, Theo gasped in surprise. Zed warned Theo not to provoke Chloe, and then left the room, leaving an awkward silence between Chloe and Theo. Chloe smiled and asked if they could talk there, assuring Theo that if he felt uncomfortable, she wouldn't intrude. Touched by her concern, Theo assured her that he didn't mind her presence at all. Chloe rushed in excitedly, carrying a basket of treats. She had brought cakes from a famous shop outside the palace, along with other snacks. She also promised to deal with her brother's behavior so Theo wouldn't have to be afraid of him. Theo realized Chloe was worried about his earlier interaction with Zed, but he hadn't actually been afraid. Instead, he thought she wouldn't understand what truly frightened him. Seeing the abundance of food, Theo invited Chloe to eat with him, as he couldn't possibly finish it all alone. Chloe happily agreed, and they enjoyed the snacks together. Theo saw Chloe as a bright light in his dark world. Chloe hesitated, but then told Theo she had something important to discuss. He had the right to choose his own future. She asked him if he wanted to leave the palace. Theo was shocked by the question, fearing separation from his only friend. He misunderstood, thinking Chloe wanted him to leave, but she quickly denied it. Flustered, she explained that there was a way for him to stay by her side as her friend. Theo realized the only way would be for him to become a high-ranking noble. Chloe confirmed this, revealing that he could be adopted by a noble family, allowing them to remain friends. Theo digested the idea, understanding that if he became a noble, he couldn't stay in the palace. Chloe sadly acknowledged this, explaining that he would need time to adjust to his new family, making it difficult for them to see each other for a while. Theo asked how long they would be apart if he were adopted. Chloe nervously estimated a few months, or as long as half a year, but assured him they could see each other as much as they wanted after that. She promised to write letters, as she was learning to write, and encouraged him to make his own choice without feeling pressured. However, she confessed that she wanted to remain friends and didn't like him being so formal with her. Touched by her words, Theo clenched his fists and agreed. He didn't want to stop being friends either. He considered his options. If he remained a servant, he could stay in the palace, but not be Chloe's friend. If he was adopted by a noble family, he couldn't live in the palace, but could continue being her friend. Since something had to be sacrificed either way, he made his decision. Looking at Chloe, he told her she was his first and most precious friend, and asked her never to forget how important she was to him. No matter how many new friends she made, no matter how much they grew up, he wanted her to remember. Chloe smiled warmly and agreed, feeling the same way. Theo and Chloe cherished their remaining time together, smiling as they reaffirmed their bond. Chloe assured Theo that his new family would be kind, and Theo, reflecting on their deep friendship, trusted that their separation wouldn't last long. A year had flown by, and new stirrings of unease rippled through the capital. Unsettling rumors began to spread. Intrigued by the whispers, Duke Rhodes sought out Sir Nigel Collin. He inquired whether the rumors of Princess Ascania's failing health were true. Caught off guard, Collin hesitated before answering. He neither confirmed nor denied, instead deflecting the question by mentioning he had to teach his youngest brother swordsmanship after work. Offering little else, he excused himself abruptly, leaving the princess's condition shrouded in mystery. At the mention of his youngest brother, Duke Rhodes's eyes widened in realization. He recalled how, roughly 6 months prior, the Nigel family had taken in a relative in need, a boy named Theo. As Duke Rhodes attempted to steer the conversation back to the princess's health, Collin saw through his facade. He remarked dryly that the Duke, who had never even met the princess, seemed suddenly and deeply concerned for her well-being. However, Collin suspected Rhodes was more worried about being overlooked in the discussions regarding the Crown Prince's future wife and the political implications thereof. Cutting the conversation short, Collin firmly excused himself. Flustered, Duke Rhodes tried to stop him, insisting he had more to say, but Collin gave him no opportunity, departing without a backward glance. To himself, Colin reflected on the marked increase in inquiries about the princess over the past year. While Chester and Zed had been managing the situation, only the overtly brazen had backed down. Most were still waiting for an opportunity to see the princess. However, he believed this wouldn't last much longer. Arriving at Chloe's chambers, the guard stationed outside saluted him. Confirming the princess was inside, Colin knocked, requesting permission to enter. Chloe, who was reading a letter, called for him to come in. As Colin entered, he paused, struck once again by how much she had changed since he first met her. Beaming, Chloe excitedly showed Colin a letter from the Emperor. She laughed, remarking that even though her birthday had passed, he was still talking about it. The letter expressed the Emperor's regret at missing her 11th birthday and suggested a grand celebration for all the birthdays he'd missed upon his return to the palace. Chloe mentioned she hadn't included the Emperor in her birthday painting, and he seemed rather displeased about it. Colin commented that the Emperor would likely summon the royal painter first upon his return. Chloe agreed, then eagerly pointed to another section of the letter. There, the Emperor had told her she could ask the Crown Prince for anything she desired, though he admitted that conversing with someone as serious and unapproachable as the Crown Prince could be difficult. Chloe excitedly insisted that Crown Prince Chester was kind and that people must have misunderstood his character. Colin smiled, thinking wryly that only the princess would see Chester in such a light. Chloe expressed her joy at learning to read, as it allowed her to write letters to those far away. However, Colin noticed a shadow fall over her expression and asked if something was troubling her. Chloe hesitated before voicing her concern. Her palace would soon be completed, but the Emperor had mentioned he might not be able to return by then. She worried for his safety on the battlefield. Colin reassured her that the Emperor was one of the strongest warriors on the continent, and that he would surely return to her. Relieved, Chloe then inquired about Theo. Colin informed her that Theo had been diligently practicing his writing, eager to send her a reply. Chloe chuckled, appreciating Theo's efforts, but wishing he would write back sooner, as she didn't care about his penmanship. Colin explained that, from Theo's perspective, he had to care, as his writing skills weren't as advanced as hers. Just as Colin was about to reveal something further, he stopped himself, remembering that Theo wanted to tell Chloe personally. To change the subject, he abruptly mentioned that he needed to take her somewhere today. Chloe, instantly alight with excitement at the prospect of seeing Theo, eagerly urged Colin to take her to the library at once. "Colin, take me to the library," she exclaimed, her mind filled with the possibility of Theo's presence. However, Colin explained that Theo was currently studying at home. Instead, someone from the academy, invited by the Crown Prince, was waiting at the library. Chloe quickly realized this must be her new tutor, formally assigned to oversee her lessons. Upon hearing this news, Chloe's excitement, this time for learning, sparked anew, surprising Colin. He remarked that most children found studying tedious. However, Chloe expressed her genuine love for acquiring new knowledge. She fondly recalled the unforgettable moment she first learned to read, repeating a simple sentence about a kitten drinking milk dozens of times. She explained that, having never formally studied before, she couldn't accept the notion of learning being boring without experiencing it herself. Her enthusiasm and curiosity for learning brought a smile to Colin's face as he watched her eagerly anticipate her upcoming lessons. Colin seemed about to say something regarding Chloe, but stopped himself, instead asking if she was curious about her new tutor. He informed her that her tutor was a former professor of integrated studies at the academy, knowledgeable in many fields, a truly remarkable scholar. Just then, the sound of snoring reached their ears. Colin looked around, noticing a man asleep beside a stack of books, his head resting on one. Witnessing this, Colin jokingly suggested that their tutor must have stepped away for a moment, asking Chloe if they should go look for him. However, Chloe, pointing towards the sleeping man, suspected he might be her tutor. Colin expressed doubt, questioning how anyone could sleep before a princess's first lesson. Still unsure, Colin decided to confirm with the librarian, as he had been told the scholar teaching Chloe was named Rael. Meanwhile, Chloe picked up a book, noticing the name Rael written inside. She concluded that the sleeping man must indeed be her tutor, and breathed a sigh of relief that they wouldn't need to search. Colin observed that Rael had written his name in all the books he was sleeping on, some multiple times, which Chloe interpreted as him cherishing his books. Colin, however, labeled it as odd behavior. Chloe then inquired whether Colin would wait outside during her lesson. He confirmed he would, but offered to stay if she preferred. Chloe assured him she would be fine, so he agreed to wait outside, telling her to call him if she needed anything. Chloe then approached the sleeping man, presumably her tutor, and attempted to wake him. Seeing how deeply asleep he must be, she hesitated, recalling her time as a slave, where exhausted people would snore even while standing. Unsure of what to do, the excitement of finally beginning her studies made her heart race. She wondered if among the stack of books there were the ones they would be using for today's lesson, and considered taking them all. Just as Chloe hesitantly drew closer, Rael startled awake, staring at her. Nervously, she greeted him, but he mumbled something she couldn't understand. Then, noticing her amber eyes, he assumed she must be shy, and offered words of comfort. Rael quipped that he never attended his first classes at the academy, and presented her with a challenge as her first lesson. She had to convince him why they should have the lesson today. Chloe, flustered, hesitated for a moment, then argued that, since they had planned to start lessons today, they should stick to the plan. However, Rael countered that since they would have lessons every day from now on, skipping one day shouldn't be a big deal. Chloe struggled to find a compelling reason why they absolutely must have a lesson today. After a moment of hesitation, she earnestly stated her desire to learn. She acknowledged that Rael might not be enthusiastic about teaching her, as it was Crown Prince Chester's order, but she genuinely wanted to learn from him. She expressed her longing to grow into a capable adult, even if it was just one day sooner, and believed that members of the royal family must possess the necessary skills to fulfill their duties. She nervously wondered if her reasoning was insufficient, when Rael remained silent. After a moment, he tugged at his collar and began to explain. He pointed out that while the royal family held absolute power in the country, a power almost unimaginable in its scope, they still couldn't completely disregard the opinions of the nobility. Chloe asked if it was because they couldn't defy them, but Rael corrected her, stating that the real reason for the royal family's own benefit was to strategically appease the nobles in order to utilize them. He then unfurled a map, revealing the vast expanse of the great Velk Empire, setting the stage for a more in-depth lesson. Chloe stared at the map, awestruck. Gesturing to the empire's vastness, Rael explained that such a massive territory couldn't be ruled solely by the Ascania royal family. He then unexpectedly told her that, as a princess, she could have simply threatened him, ordered his execution even, to make him comply. Chloe gasped, incredulous at the thought, but Rael clarified that power and threats must be wielded appropriately. He suggested she could instead invoke the crown prince's authority, demonstrating how to command respect. Hesitantly, Chloe mimicked him, practicing the delivery of a firm command. Rael praised her, explaining that in certain situations, she could even invoke the emperor's name, as no citizen of the empire would dare defy the will of the Ascania family. Chloe felt a wave of relief, the weight on her shoulders lessening slightly as she began to understand the significance of authority. Rael informed Chloe that his lessons would differ from what she anticipated. She wouldn't just be learning academics, but how to live as a princess of Ascania. However, this wouldn't be easy. She would have to catch up on everything other royals had learned since birth, meaning the workload would be immense. Chloe, resolute, insisted that no matter the amount of homework or the difficulty, she would persevere. She believed that precisely because she lacked so much, she had to give it her all. Rael gently corrected her, stating that she wasn't lacking, merely starting later than others. This reassured Chloe, making her feel that with enough effort, she could accomplish anything. With newfound motivation, she prepared to begin her first lesson. Rael announced they would start with ancient languages, assigning her the task of copying each letter 500 times. A stunned Chloe hesitated, but Rael playfully reminded her that she had just claimed she could do anything. In his office, Chester read letters, annoyed that nobles were still writing to Chloe, wondering if they wanted to suffer a tax audit like the Hanover family. However, a letter from His Majesty suggested granting the land of Regalo to Chloe, allowing her to take up gardening. Chester acknowledged Regalo's fertile soil, deeming it a decent choice, but due to its distance from the capital, he considered Archon a better alternative, as he already owned land there. He decided to grant the Archon land to Chloe instead. Just then, a guard knocked and entered, reporting protests at the capital's political meeting. Unfazed, Chester asked what the issue was this time. The guard explained that there was dissent regarding the new regulation allowing women to participate in the winter night entrance exam. Chester sighed, finding the opposition predictable. They argued that with the crown prince still unmarried, having female knights and ladies-in-waiting present in the palace was inappropriate. Despite their objections, Chester instructed the guard to proceed with both matters, referring to both the female knight selection and the crown princess election. The guard, shocked, asked if this meant Chester intended to take a consort. Chester confirmed, but noted that even initiating the selection didn't guarantee a smooth process. Still stunned, the guard asked if Chester truly intended to interview the candidates. Chester affirmed, but clarified that he couldn't guarantee any of them possessed the qualities required of a crown princess. A guard warned of potential objections, but Chester dismissed the concern, stating that dissent was nothing new, and instructed him to proceed as planned. Shifting the subject, Chester inquired about the child sent to Nigel's household. The guard reported that by carefully managing the timing of the adoption, they had successfully obscured any connection between the child and the princess. Furthermore, with Sir Nigel now serving as Chloe's guard, any encounters between the child and the princess wouldn't appear suspicious. Chester acknowledged the report, noting it was time for them to meet. The scene shifted to Chloe and Colin riding in a carriage. Colin expressed surprise that Chester had permitted the outing. Chloe, brimming with curiosity, asked where they were going, but Colin remained evasive, only saying it was somewhere that would be good for her. Annoyed, Chloe complained that he still wouldn't tell her. Colin insisted she would understand when they arrived. Chloe puzzled over the secrecy surrounding their destination. When they finally arrived, a man bowed to Chloe, introducing himself as Eugene Allen, the butler of the Nigel household. He welcomed her warmly, stating they had been expecting her and offering his assistance should she need anything. Chloe politely greeted butler Eugene. Her formal tone surprised Eugene. He faltered momentarily, but quickly recovered, assuring her he would do his best to make her stay comfortable. Chloe thanked him with a smile. Eugene then informed Colin that the young masters and mistresses were waiting for them in the drawing room. Colin inquired about a certain little rascal, and Eugene confirmed that the individual had finished their lessons and was also in the drawing room. Chloe looked around, realizing that this was Colin and Theo's home, and wondered if she would finally get to see Theo today. Eugene led her towards the drawing room, and she followed, anticipation bubbling within her. Upon entering the room, Chloe saw Colin's younger siblings engaged in boisterous play. They were arguing with youthful energy, one demanding something from another, while a third sibling attempted to mediate. Meanwhile, their older sister, Emily, was being scolded for standing on a table. It was a lively and chaotic scene. Chloe gasped at the disarray, momentarily flustered, worried that someone might get hurt. Colin quickly intervened, sharply ordering his siblings to stop. They immediately ceased their antics, responding excitedly to his presence. However, Colin chided them, frustrated that they weren't properly prepared to receive a guest. Before he could continue, a young girl rose gracefully and curtsied before Chloe, introducing herself as Emily of House Nysel. She politely expressed her pleasure at meeting the princess, mentioning she had heard much about her from her brother. Colin looked surprised by Emily's unexpected display of proper etiquette. Following her lead, the other siblings introduced themselves one by one: Cersei, Lewin, and Jerry. Though they admitted to being a bit rowdy and apologized to Chloe, she waved them off with a warm smile, assuring them she didn't mind. However, she noticed that only 4 siblings had introduced themselves, wondering if 2 were missing. Just then, a boy suddenly cried out from the floor, complaining that no one was helping him up and that he also wanted to greet the princess. Emily coldly ignored him, telling him to stay on the floor as she deemed him unworthy of being introduced to the princess. Shane complained about Emily's harshness and appealed to Theo for help. Hearing his name, Chloe startled, wondering if this was truly the Theo she knew. Theo helped Shane up, jokingly remarking that he was capable of polishing the floor with his body. He then turned to Chloe, formally greeting her and introducing himself as Theo of House Nysel. Chloe was stunned, not only by seeing Theo again, but also by how much he had grown. She walked towards him in surprise, realizing that Theo was now taller than her. Theo calmly confirmed that he had grown about 7 centimeters. Chloe felt a pang of dismay, noting that she had barely grown in comparison. She even worried that if this continued, she might have to start calling Theo older brother. Meanwhile, Theo's younger siblings, finding their brother's reaction amusing, whispered amongst themselves. They realized Theo was actually pleased about being taller and had deliberately kept his secret from Chloe to see her surprised expression. Theo turned, his face carefully neutral, and told them to quiet down a bit in the presence of the princess. The boys protested that they weren't being that loud, but conceded that Theo had a point. Seeing how much Theo had grown, noticing his new clothes and the different air about him, Chloe felt a surge of happiness. But what pleased her most was that Theo finally had a home. Hesitantly, Theo asked Chloe if they could be friends. Chloe, overjoyed, readily agreed. Hand in hand, they walked, their bond deepening. Meanwhile, Theo's siblings chattered amongst themselves. They guessed that Theo must be showing the princess around the Nigel estate and expressed their own desire to give her a tour. The conversation shifted to the new entrance exam regulations, which now allowed girls to participate. Emily excitedly announced her intention to take the knight entrance exam, dreaming of becoming the first female knight. Jerry, however, was quick to dismiss the idea, reminding her that she'd probably injure herself just picking up a sword. Another brother consoled Emily, admitting his own lack of interest in swordsmanship. Then, the discussion turned to Theo, whom they all agreed was the most skilled swordsman among them. They were confident he would take the exam next year, given his prowess and enthusiasm. Although Theo had initially wanted to take the exam this year, his training time had been too short. However, if he continued to train diligently, with his exceptional talent and dedication to swordsmanship, he might even become the youngest to pass the exam, like Prince Zed. Jerry mentioned a recent rumor about a moving tower being sighted, wondering if Prince Ezra had returned. Someone asked for details, and Jerry explained that his friend had seen it in Todin a few days ago. It was common knowledge throughout the Empire that the third prince, Ezra, rarely entered the capital. He only returned during significant crises, such as assassination attempts on royal family members or natural disasters. The siblings speculated on the reason for his return, hoping it was for the princess rather than a national emergency. Meanwhile, Chloe and Theo were together. Chloe, surprised to learn that Theo had been practicing swordsmanship, playfully scolded Colin for not telling her sooner. Theo explained that he had asked Colin to keep it a secret so he could surprise her. When Chloe asked if he planned to become a knight like Colin, Theo expressed interest but admitted uncertainty about his future. Chloe encouraged him, saying he was sure to succeed, as he had always been talented. Theo modestly denied being good at everything, but promised to do his best. He also mentioned that if he officially became a knight, he might be assigned to guard the royal family. Chloe realized Theo wanted to be her knight, and when he shyly nodded, she was thrilled with the idea. Theo then suggested showing Chloe his room, and she eagerly agreed. Inside, he casually told her she could take anything she liked, as Lewin had given him some things he didn't want. Chloe insisted she wasn't there to take anything, just to look around, and excitedly shared that she now had many books and toys. She also mentioned that Chester had found her a wonderful tutor who could answer any question without hesitation. Thrilled by all the interesting things in Theo's room, Chloe chattered on excitedly. Watching her happy expression, Theo guessed she must like clever people. Then Chloe spotted a mysterious box and curiously asked Theo what it was.